I need the money tomorrow. My wife ordered me, handing me her parents' debt of $750,000. And no delays. She added. I smiled and said, okay. For hours later, I was at the airport. When she came to home for the money, she found only a closed door and a box, which she opened and started screaming. You know that moment when someone mistakes your wallet for a magic lamp? Like they genuinely believe if they rub it hard enough, a genie's gonna pop out and grant their wildest financial fantasies? Yeah, that was my Tuesday evening, except instead of a lamp, it was my entire existence, and instead of 3 wishes, it was one very expensive demand wrapped in designer perfume and audacity. I was sitting in my home office, minding my own business, trying to pretend that spreadsheets were interesting enough to justify staring at them for 6 hours straight, when I heard it. 3 loud knocks that hit my door like someone was announcing the apocalypse. Not the polite, hey honey, got a minute, kind of knock. No, this was the, I'm about to ruin your evening and possibly your entire financial future kind of knock. The kind that makes your coffee taste bitter before you even take the next sip. My wife, Bianca, stormed in with the energy of a Category 5 hurricane wearing Louboutins. Her heels were clicking against the hardwood floor like a countdown to trouble, each step a deliberate warning that whatever was about to come out of her mouth was going to cost me more than my sanity. She was waving a folder so thick it looked like it could choke a commercial-grade printer, and her face had that expression I'd come to recognize over the years, the one that said, I've already made a decision, and you're just here to fund it. I need the money tomorrow, she announced, not asked, announced, like she was reading a decree from some royal proclamament. $750,000. And no delays. She emphasized that last part like I was some kind of Amazon Prime package that better show up on time, or there'd be hell to pay in the form of 1-star reviews and angry phone calls to customer service. She didn't ask me if I had it. Didn't ask if it was convenient. Didn't even bother with the courtesy of explaining what apocalyptic scenario required $750,000 by tomorrow morning. She just commanded it into existence, as if my bank account was some kind of voice-activated ATM that responded to her tone of desperation mixed with entitlement. I sat there for a moment, letting the absurdity of it all sink in like a stone dropping into the ocean of my patience. Apparently, and I only knew this because she bothered to explain after I didn't immediately jump up and start printing money in the basement, her parents had decided to sink their entire life savings into a luxury furniture business that absolutely nobody asked for, wanted, or needed. We're talking about the kind of furniture that costs more than a car, but is somehow less comfortable than sitting on a pile of receipts from all your bad decisions. And now, surprise, surprise, they owed serious money to what Bianca delicately referred to as investors, which is rich people code for people who don't send friendly payment reminders. They send vans with guys named Rocco who have very persuasive methods of debt collection. I looked her straight in the eye, took a slow sip of my now cold coffee that tasted like disappointment and broken dreams, and smiled. Not a warm smile. Not a reassuring smile. The kind of smile you give when you've just figured out the punchline to a joke that's been building for years. Okay, I said simply, letting that single word hang in the air like a piano suspended by dental floss. She blinked, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I saw a genuine shock register on her face. She'd clearly prepared for an argument, maybe even a full-scale domestic dispute complete with raised voices and slammed doors. She'd probably rehearsed her counter-arguments in the car on the way home, mentally preparing for my resistance, my questions, my very reasonable concerns about producing $750,000 overnight like I was some kind of financial magician. Did you hear me? She asked, her voice carrying that edge of suspicion that comes when someone agrees too easily to something unreasonable. Loud and clear, I said, maintaining that same smile that probably looked more unsettling than reassuring. I'll handle it. And I meant every word, just not in the way she was expecting, not even remotely close to what her entitled little heart was hoping for. She stood there for another moment, folders still clutched in her manicured hands, probably trying to figure out if I'd finally snapped or if I'd secretly won the lottery and forgot to mention it. When I didn't elaborate, didn't ask for details, didn't do anything except turn back to my spreadsheet like we'd just discussed what to have for dinner, she eventually left, heels clicking away with slightly less confidence than when she'd arrived. For hours later, as the sun was setting and casting long shadows across our overpriced house filled with overpriced furniture that her parents probably consulted on. I was at the airport rolling my suitcase like a man who'd finally developed a severe and incurable allergy to stupidity. The terminal was buzzing with the usual chaos of travelers, but I felt oddly calm, like someone who'd just made the best decision of their life and was finally about to get some peace and quiet. The TSA agent looked at my ticket and then at me. "Business trip?" she asked casually, running my bag through the scanner. I smiled, that same smile I'd given Bianca earlier, the one that knew something nobody else did yet. "Something like that," I replied. "More like a permanent vacation from bad investments and worse in-laws." She looked confused but stamped my boarding pass anyway, probably used to travelers saying weird things at odd hours. As I walked toward my gate, rolling my suitcase behind me, I felt lighter than I had in years, like I'd finally dropped a weight I'd been carrying so long I forgot it wasn't supposed to be there. Tomorrow morning, Bianca was going to wake up expecting a miracle, expecting that magic lamp to produce her $750,000 wish. Instead, she was going to get something much better, much more educational, and infinitely more satisfying for me. She was going to get the truth, delivered in a cardboard box with a bow on top, because if she wanted everything by tomorrow with no delays, well, I was about to give her exactly that, just not the version she ordered. My flight was boarding, and as I handed over my ticket one last time, I couldn't help but chuckle. $750,000 by tomorrow morning, no delays. Sure thing, sweetheart. Your delivery is already being prepared, and trust me, it's going to arrive right on schedule. Let me explain Bianca's family before you start feeling bad for them, because I can already sense some of you out there getting all sympathetic, thinking maybe they're just down on their luck, maybe they hit a rough patch, maybe the economy screwed them over like it does to most honest, hardworking people. Let me stop you right there and save you the emotional energy, because these people aren't victims of circumstance. They're architects of their own financial disasters, and they've got the blueprints to prove it. Her dad, Martin, is the kind of guy who could sell ice to Eskimos if Eskimos were gullible enough to believe his pitch and didn't bother checking if the ice was actually frozen or just expensive water with confidence. This man once, and I'm not making this up because reality is somehow stranger than any fiction I could create, tried to sell air purifiers that didn't actually purify air. Let that sink in for a moment. Air purifiers that didn't purify anything. They just sat there looking expensive and modern, humming with the sound of broken dreams and false advertising, making the room smell like regret mixed with that fake, mountain breeze, scent that smells nothing like any mountain I've ever been near. He sold maybe 12 units before people figured out their allergies weren't getting better and their cats were still making them sneeze, and by the time the complaints rolled in, he'd already moved on to his next brilliant scheme, leaving behind a trail of unhappy customers and a Yelp page that read like a crime scene report. Her mom, Cynthia, treated credit cards like they were scratch tickets from the gas station, except with worse odds and higher interest rates. She had this philosophy, and I'm quoting directly here because I couldn't make this up if I tried, that money spent is money invested in happiness, which sounds almost profound until you realize she's saying this while buying her 4th designer handbag this month, none of which she actually needed or would use more than twice. She'd swipe that plastic like she was performing a magic trick, like the bill would somehow disappear into thin air or get paid by the tooth fairy or some other mythical creature that handles the debts of people who refuse to live within their means. Her wallet was like a graveyard of maxed-out Visas and MasterCards, each one a tiny tombstone marking another failed attempt at financial responsibility. And Bianca, oh sweet Bianca, she inherited their confidence, but not their caution, which is like inheriting a sports car, but not the ability to drive or the insurance to cover it when you inevitably crash it into a ditch. She had her mother's spending habits and her father's ability to ignore reality, a combination that should probably come with a warning label and possibly require a license to operate in public. She could drop $5,000 on a handbag without blinking, but would lecture me about leaving lights on in empty rooms like that was the real drain on our finances. She had this remarkable talent for spending money we had on things we didn't need, while simultaneously panicking about money we didn't have for things her family absolutely shouldn't have invested in. I'd already covered her parents' medical bills, and not the normal, oops I broke my arm, kind of medical bills, but though we decided to get experimental cosmetic procedures in a country with questionable medical licensing kind of bills. I'd paid for 2 so-called emergency vacations, because apparently when you're drowning in debt, the only logical solution is to fly to Cancun and drown in margaritas instead, and somehow that's supposed to clear your head and help you make better financial decisions. Spoiler alert, it doesn't. And then there was the suspicious business expansion in Italy that Martin pitched as a crucial networking opportunity to expand the furniture business into European markets, which translated from bullshit to English means it was just a 3-month wine tour where he and Cynthia pretended to have meetings while actually just getting day drunk on Chianti and taking selfies in front of historical landmarks they couldn't name. The math was simple, painfully, brutally simple. The kind of equation that even a 5th grader could solve if that 5th grader had access to my bank statements and a basic understanding of cause and effect. Their debt equaled my exhaustion multiplied by infinity, with a side of resentment and a garnish of wondering what the hell I was thinking when I said, I do, without including a clause about financial boundaries and the definition of emergency. Every time I thought we'd hit rock bottom, they'd somehow find a basement beneath the basement, a sub-basement of bad decisions that required my wallet to bail them out of. The moment she dropped that $750,000 bomb on my desk like it was a casual request to pick up milk on the way home, I saw the pattern with crystal clarity, like someone had finally turned on the lights in a room I'd been stumbling around in for years. This wasn't new. This wasn't even surprising. This was just the latest, greatest, most expensive episode in a long-running series called How Much Can We Extract from This Guy Before He Finally Snaps? And I'd been the star of this show for way too long, playing the role of the responsible one, the reliable one, the one who always comes through, the human safety net who catches everyone else while slowly tearing under the weight of their combined stupidity. I was never the husband in this relationship, not really, not in the way that matters. I was the ATM with emotional support features, the kind of machine that dispenses cash when you punch in the right code, except the code was just showing up and demanding it with enough urgency and drama. I was the backup plan, the emergency contact, the guy whose name went on all the forms under financially responsible party, while they got to play fast and loose with reality and consequences. Her family had this remarkable ability to create crises out of thin air, like they were running some kind of disaster factory and business was booming. They'd make decisions that any reasonable person would recognize as catastrophically stupid, then act shocked, genuinely, authentically shocked, when those decisions resulted in catastrophically stupid outcomes. And every single time, without fail, they'd turn to me with those expectant looks, like I was supposed to pull a miracle out of my back pocket along with my checkbook. I'd spent years being the solution to problems I didn't create, funding lifestyles I didn't approve of, enabling behaviors that should have been stopped at the first red flag, which honestly appeared before I even proposed, but I was too young and stupid and optimistic to recognize it. I'd been the responsible adult in a family of perpetual teenagers who never learned that actions have consequences because I kept cushioning their falls, kept paying their bills, kept making their problems disappear with my credit rating and my savings account and my apparently infinite patience. But sitting there in my office, listening to Bianca demand $750,000 like she was ordering a pizza, something finally clicked into place. This wasn't going to stop. This wasn't a phase. This wasn't going to get better with time or communication or couples therapy. This was the rest of my life unless I did something about it. Unless I finally drew a line and meant it. By midnight, my plan was brewing in my head like the world's most satisfying cup of revenge coffee, the kind that keeps you awake not because of the caffeine, but because of the pure adrenaline rush of finally doing something about a problem that's been festering for years. I was sitting in my office with the lights dimmed, my laptop glowing in front of me like some kind of modern-day war room, and I felt more alive than I had in months, maybe years. This wasn't anger. This wasn't spite. This was clarity, the kind of crystal-clear thinking that only comes when you've been pushed so far past your limit that you loop back around to being completely calm and methodical. I wasn't going to yell or argue or throw things, or have one of those dramatic confrontations you see in movies where people scream and cry and break expensive dinnerware. No, that's amateur hour. That's what people do when they're operating on emotion instead of strategy. I was going to educate, and education, my friends, is so much more effective than anger because it lasts longer and cuts deeper. You can forget a fight. You can move past harsh words. But you can never unsee the truth when it's presented to you in printed form with highlighted sections and footnotes. Years of marriage had taught me one thing, one absolutely fundamental truth about human nature that I should probably have recognized earlier, but better late than never. Nothing, and I mean absolutely nothing, terrifies freeloaders like accountability. These are people who've spent their entire lives operating in the shadows of vague promises and convenient memory loss, always moving forward without ever looking back at the wreckage they've left behind. They thrive in chaos because chaos is hard to document, hard to track, hard to prove. But accountability, documentation, evidence, that's kryptonite to people who've built their entire existence on the foundation of it'll work itself out, and don't worry about the details. So I started building my masterpiece. And I'm not being dramatic when I call it that, because this was going to be beautiful in the way that justice is beautiful, in the way that truth is beautiful when it's been hidden for too long. I grabbed a brown cardboard box from the garage, the kind that Amazon packages come in, completely unremarkable and innocent looking. If Bianca saw this box sitting by the door, she wouldn't think twice about it. She'd probably assume it was another delivery of something she ordered and forgot about, which happened approximately 3 times a week, because online shopping was her therapy and our bank account was the copay. Inside this humble cardboard box, I was going to place a collection of documents that would make a forensic accountant weep with joy. I started with copies of every single transaction I'd ever made for her family. And when I say every transaction, I mean I went back to the beginning, to the very first time Martin called me saying he needed just a small loan to cover an unexpected expense. I had kept everything. Not because I was planning this specific moment, but because I'm the kind of person who keeps records, who saves receipts, who believes in documentation because memory is unreliable, but bank statements don't lie. I printed out screenshots of her mom's emergency spa receipts, and I put emergency in mental air quotes so large you could see them from space because there is nothing, and I repeat nothing, emergency about a hot stone massage and a seaweed wrap. An emergency is a heart attack. An emergency is your house burning down. An emergency is not deciding on a random Tuesday that your aura needs realigning and your chakras need balancing at a luxury spa that charges more per hour than most people make in a day. But Cynthia had called it an emergency, had used that exact word with tears in her voice, and I'd paid for it, because that's what I did back then. I paid for things and asked questions later, usually too much later to matter. I included her dad's fake business invoices, the ones he'd created for his various ventures that went nowhere, but somehow still required startup capital, operating expenses, and emergency funds. I had invoices for the air purifier business, for a brief stint trying to sell timeshares and properties he didn't own, for a pyramid scheme that he swore wasn't a pyramid scheme because it was shaped more like a diamond opportunity structure, and for at least 3 other enterprises that collapsed faster than a house of cards in a wind tunnel. Each invoice was a little monument to optimism without planning, confidence without competence, and my apparently limitless capacity to believe that maybe, just maybe, this time would be different. And then, because I'm nothing if not thorough and maybe a little bit theatrical when the situation calls for it, I created a beautifully printed invoice of my own. I spent an embarrassing amount of time on the formatting, making sure it looked professional and official, using the same invoice template that Martin loved to use for his fake businesses. At the top, I put my name as the creditor and Bianca's entire family as the debtor. The whiskey burned going down, but in a good way, in a celebratory way, in a here's to finally growing a spine kind of way. Then I opened my laptop and started booking a one-way flight, because the thing about burning bridges is that you don't need a return ticket. At 3 a.m., I quietly rolled my suitcase through the hallway with the stealth of a man who'd finally figured out that sometimes the best argument is the one you don't have. The best explanation is no explanation at all, and the best goodbye is the one you don't say out loud. The wheels made this soft humming sound against the hardwood floor, and I found myself moving in slow motion, not because I was having second thoughts, but because I wanted to savor every single second of this moment. This glorious moment of finally finally taking control of my own life instead of letting it be controlled by other people's disasters and demands. The house was dark except for the neon glow of our expensive refrigerator that had more IQ points than my in-laws, more smart features than my marriage had red flags, and probably a better understanding of boundaries than anyone in Bianca's family tree. That fridge cost $4,000 because apparently regular refrigerators that just keep food cold aren't good enough anymore. We needed one that could connect to Wi-Fi, send us notifications about expiring milk, and probably judge our late-night snacking habits. Bianca had insisted we needed it, had actually used the word need like it was a medical necessity, and I'd bought it because that's what I did back then. I bought things to keep the peace, to avoid arguments, to maintain the illusion that everything was fine when everything was actually a dumpster fire wrapped in designer labels. I left the box right at the entrance, positioned perfectly so it would be the first thing anyone saw when they walked in the door. I tied a little bow on top using some ribbon I found in the gift wrap drawer, because if you're going to deliver a box full of financial truth bombs and documented evidence of years of exploitation, you might as well make it pretty. The bow was red, cheerful, the kind of bow you'd see on a birthday present or a Christmas gift, which made it even more perfect because Bianca was definitely going to feel like she'd received a present, just not the kind she was expecting or wanted or could return to the store for store credit. My flight to Seattle was at 6 a.m., which meant I had about 3 hours to get to the airport, get through security, and position myself far enough away that when the inevitable explosion happened, I'd be safely out of the blast radius. I'd chosen Seattle deliberately, carefully, after spending approximately 45 minutes researching cities that were far away, but not too far, different enough to feel like a fresh start, but not so different that I'd feel like I was on another planet. Seattle had rain, coffee, tech jobs, and most importantly, it had approximately 2,800 miles between me and Bianca's next meltdown. At check-in, the airline agent was way too chipper for this hour of the morning. One of those people who apparently wake up with sunshine shooting out of their various orifices and enthusiasm for life that seems almost offensive when you've been awake for 24 hours planning your escape from a toxic marriage. She looked at my ticket, then at me, probably noticing that I had the expression of someone who was either running away from something or running towards something, and in my case it was definitely both. Business or pleasure? She asked with that standard customer service smile that's been practiced in front of a mirror about 10,000 times. I smiled back, and I could feel it was one of those smiles that doesn't quite reach your eyes because your eyes are too busy calculating freedom and distance and the exact moment when your phone is going to start exploding with angry calls and text messages. Revenge therapy, I said, and I wasn't even joking. I was being completely honest because that's exactly what this was. Therapeutic revenge, the kind that's been prescribed by years of being underappreciated and financially drained. And the dosage was one cardboard box taken first thing in the morning on an empty stomach of expectations. She laughed like she thought I was joking, stamped my boarding pass, and told me to have a great flight. I wondered if she'd remember this interaction later, if she'd see the news stories or social media posts and think, oh damn, that was the revenge therapy guy. But probably not because airline agents see hundreds of passengers every day and most of us blur together into one giant mass of people trying to get from point A to point B without losing our minds or our luggage. As I sipped coffee in the lounge, the kind of mediocre airport coffee that costs $7 because they've got you trapped and you're desperate for caffeine, I imagined Bianca waking up in a few hours. I could picture it so clearly it was like watching a movie in my head, and it was going to be the best movie I'd never actually see in person. She'd wake up with her alarm, probably hit snooze twice because she always did, finally drag herself out of bed with that slightly annoyed expression she always had in the mornings before her coffee, and makeup transformed her into the polished version of herself that she presented to the world. She'd go through her usual routine, probably spending 45 minutes on skincare and hair, because heaven forbid she faced the day looking anything less than Instagram ready. And then she'd come downstairs full of confidence, expecting to see me sitting at the kitchen table with my laptop and a bank transfer confirmation ready to go. She'd probably already planned how she was going to call her parents with the good news, how she was going to be the hero who saved the day, how grateful they'd all be that she'd married someone with deep pockets and apparently no spine. Instead, she was going to see that box, that beautiful brown cardboard box with its cheerful red bow, and her smile was going to die instantly. She'd approach it confused at first, maybe thinking I'd gotten her a gift as some kind of weird apology for not being enthusiastic enough about bankrupting myself for her family's terrible business decisions. She'd tear into it with those perfectly manicured nails that cost more than most people's car payments, and then her entire world was going to tilt sideways. The smile would die. The confidence would evaporate. The realization would hit her like a freight train made of receipts and reality checks. She'd flip through page after page of documentation, seeing in black and white exactly how much money had flowed out of my accounts and into her family's endless pit of financial irresponsibility. She'd see her mother's spa days, her father's failed businesses, the vacations, the emergency loans that were never paid back, the casual requests that turned into thousands of dollars over the years. And then she'd find my invoice, that beautiful invoice with its itemized list and its grand total of $2.5 million, and she'd read the note. And that's when the screaming would start. I could already hear it in my imagination, that particular pitch that Bianca hit when she was really, truly upset. Not the fake upset she used to manipulate situations, but the genuine upset that came from being confronted with something she couldn't charm or cry or demand her way out of. It was going to hit such a high frequency that dogs 3 blocks away would start howling in sympathy, car alarms would go off, and even our smart refrigerator would probably register it as some kind of emergency alert. Oh, she was going to scream. She was going to scream so loud that the neighbors would consider calling the police, and then she'd probably call me, and then her parents, and then probably a lawyer, and then maybe her therapist if she had one, which she should have had years ago but refused to get because she didn't believe in therapy. She believed in shopping and complaining and making other people solve her problems. According to my smart doorbell footage, and let me just say that the $99 I spent on that Ring camera was the best investment I ever made because it's given me more entertainment value than Netflix, HBO, and Disney Plus combined. She arrived at exactly 9:10 a.m. looking like she'd just stepped out of a magazine spread about women who have their lives completely together. Her hair was perfect, not a strand out of place, styled in those effortless-looking waves that actually take 45 minutes and 3 different products to achieve. Her expression was smug, that particular brand of smugness that comes from believing you've won before the game even starts, the kind of confidence that's about to get shattered into approximately 8 million pieces. I was sitting in the Seattle airport by this point, my connecting flight delayed by 30 minutes, which was normally the kind of thing that would annoy me, but today felt like a gift from the universe because it meant I had extra time to watch this unfold in real time. I had my phone out, the Ring app open, volume turned up as high as it would go without disturbing the other passengers who were sitting around me looking equally annoyed about their delays. I probably looked insane, grinning at my phone like a maniac, but I didn't care because this was about to be better than any movie, any TV show, any form of entertainment that Hollywood had ever produced. "Babe?" she called out as she walked through the door, her voice echoing through the house with that casual expectation that I'd be there, ready and waiting with a solution to all her problems. She said it the way you'd call out for someone you expected to answer, not with any real concern or worry, just that automatic greeting that married people do when they come home. No answer came, obviously, because I was approximately 3,000 miles away sipping overpriced airport coffee and living my best life, but she didn't seem concerned yet. She probably figured I was in my office or in the shower or somewhere else in the house doing whatever it is she assumed I did when I wasn't actively solving her family's financial disasters. Then she saw the box, and I watched through the grainy doorbell camera footage as her entire demeanor changed. She stopped walking, tilted her head slightly like a confused puppy seeing its reflection for the first time, and I could practically see the wheels turning in her head trying to figure out what this was. Her first instinct was probably to assume I'd ordered something, because in her world, boxes just appeared on doorsteps full of things people bought online without thinking twice about it. But then she noticed the bow, that cheerful red bow I'd tied on top, and her expression shifted from confused to cautiously optimistic. She squatted down in those expensive heels that probably cost more than my flight to Seattle, the kind of designer shoes that are beautiful, but completely impractical for anything resembling actual movement or comfort, and she tore at the tape with those perfectly manicured nails. The sound of the tape ripping was captured perfectly by the doorbell microphone, that satisfying screech of packing tape being pulled away, and I felt this little surge of anticipation knowing that in about 5 seconds, her entire morning was about to derail spectacularly. She unfolded the flaps, reaching inside with this expression that was half curious and half excited, probably still thinking this was some kind of surprise gift, maybe an apology present for not being more enthusiastic about bankrupting myself for her parents' furniture fiasco. Her hand pulled out the first document, and I watched as her eyes scanned the page, watched as her face went from excited to confused to slowly, gradually horrified. The smile died instantly, just completely evaporated from her face like someone had hit a kill switch on her happiness. It was beautiful in the way that karma is beautiful, in the way that natural consequences are satisfying when they finally catch up to people who've been running from them for years. Her mouth opened slightly, forming this little O shape that would have been comical if it wasn't so perfectly timed with my expectations of how this would go. What is this?" she mumbled, more to herself than to anyone else since she still didn't realize I wasn't home. Probably wouldn't be home ever again if I had anything to say about it. She was flipping through printed receipts of her family's shopping sprees, and I could see the moment each one registered in her brain. The spa receipts where her mom had declared an aura emergency. The business expenses for her dad's air purifier scam. The vacation costs for their Italian wine tour disguised as a business expansion. Every single page was another nail in the coffin of her assumption that I was just going to hand over $750,000 without question or consequence. Her dad's company name appeared on multiple documents, right next to his offshore gambling losses that he'd somehow neglected to mention when he was asking me for loans to save the business. I'd done my homework, had actually hired a private investigator for 2 weeks just to confirm my suspicions, and boy had that been money well spent because it turned out Martin wasn't just bad at business, he was actively terrible at hiding his terrible habits. The man had been gambling online at 2 a.m. on weeknights, betting on sports teams he'd never heard of in countries he couldn't locate on a map, losing thousands of dollars with the same confidence he used when pitching his ridiculous business ideas. Then she found the note, my beautiful, carefully crafted note that I'd spent probably too much time writing and rewriting until it had just the right amount of sarcasm mixed with finality. She read it out loud, her voice getting higher and more strained with each word. You wanted everything by tomorrow. Congratulations, you're right on schedule. The scream that came out of her mouth was something special, something I don't think I'd ever heard from her before in all our years of marriage. It wasn't the frustrated scream she'd use when traffic was bad or her favorite restaurant was booked. It wasn't the angry scream she'd deploy when I forgot to pick up her dry cleaning or double-booked over one of her brunch plans. This was a primal scream, the kind that comes from deep in your chest when you realize you've been completely and thoroughly outmaneuvered, when the reality you thought you were living in suddenly reveals itself to be completely different from actual reality. It hit such a pitch that I had to pull my phone slightly away from my ear, even though I was listening through the speaker. The other passengers in the airport waiting area definitely noticed at that point, because several people looked over at me, probably wondering what kind of horror movie I was watching that could produce that kind of sound effect. One older lady actually looked concerned, like she was considering asking if I was okay, but I just smiled and gave her a thumbs up because I was way better than okay. I was experiencing pure, unfiltered joy. Even Alexa apparently registered the scream because I could hear in the background, faintly through the doorbell mic, our Amazon Echo responding with its slightly confused robot voice. I'm sorry, I didn't catch that. Could you repeat your question? Which was probably the most accidentally hilarious thing Alexa had ever done, responding to a scream of existential horror like it was a misunderstood voice command for checking the weather or setting a timer. Bianca dropped the papers, and they scattered across our expensive marble entryway like the world's most expensive confetti, each page a little monument to years of taking advantage of someone's good nature and deep pockets. She put her hands on her head, fingers tangling in that perfectly styled hair that was about to get significantly less perfect, and just stood there for a moment looking like someone who'd just realized they'd bet everything on red and the ball had landed on black. By noon, I was sitting in a restaurant in downtown Seattle eating the fluffiest, most perfectly golden pancakes I'd ever had in my entire life, and I'm not exaggerating when I say they tasted like freedom with a side of maple syrup. The restaurant was one of those trendy brunch places where people line up around the block on weekends. The kind with exposed brick walls and Edison bulbs hanging from the ceiling and a menu that uses words like artisanal and locally sourced without a trace of irony. Normally, I'd roll my eyes at this kind of place, but today everything felt different, lighter, like someone had removed a 200-pound weight from my shoulders and replaced it with actual functional happiness. I had my phone propped up against the little metal napkin holder, watching Bianca's meltdown go viral in real time. And let me tell you, the internet works fast when there's drama involved. Apparently, in her panic and fury and complete inability to process what was happening, she decided that the best course of action was to record an angry Instagram video, because nothing says, "I'm handling this maturely," quite like putting your emotional breakdown on social media for the entire world to see. She'd positioned her phone at that slightly upward angle that everyone uses when they're trying to look their best, which is hilarious because no amount of strategic camera positioning can make you look good when you're mid-meltdown. The video was a masterpiece of unintentional comedy. She was tearful, mascara starting to run just slightly in the corners of her eyes, her voice doing that shaky thing that happens when you're trying to cry and talk at the same time. It was the full performance, the complete, "how could he do this to me?" routine that she'd probably practiced in her head without realizing how it would actually come across to people who didn't already have a vested interest in taking her side. She talked about betrayal and abandonment and how she couldn't believe someone could be so cruel, and conspicuously absent from this entire monologue was any mention of the $750,000 she'd demanded or the years of financial support I'd provided to her utterly hopeless family. The comments section wasn't kind, and I spent probably 40 minutes just scrolling through them with a grin on my face that probably made me look unhinged to the other brunch customers. The internet has this beautiful way of cutting through bullshit with surgical precision, and the people watching this video weren't buying what she was selling. "Sis, he didn't leave you. He escaped," read one comment with about 15,000 likes, and I wanted to find that person and send them a thank you card because they'd summed up my entire situation in 7 words. Plot twist. "He paid her back in trauma," was another gem, sitting at the top of the comment section with hearts and laughing emojis multiplying by the second. Someone else had written, "This is what happens when you marry for money and forget the prenup clause," which was fascinating because we actually did have a prenup that Bianca had insisted on back when she thought she was going to be the one with more money, back before her family's various business ventures collapsed like a series of increasingly expensive dominoes. That prenup was looking pretty good right about now, sitting in a lawyer's file somewhere protecting the assets I'd worked for from the family that treated my bank account like a community resource. People were doing deep dives in the comments, sharing their own stories of being financially drained by in-laws and irresponsible partners, creating this weird support group in Bianca's comment section that was definitely not the sympathy party she'd been hoping for. Someone had even created a hashtag Box of Truth, which was already trending in the local area and spreading outward like a financial justice wildfire. The hashtag was full of memes, people sharing their own experiences with entitled family members, and an uncomfortable amount of accurate speculation about what exactly had been in that box. Her family started panicking, and I knew this because my phone started blowing up with calls from numbers I'd blocked months ago, but had apparently found new phones or borrowed someone else's device to try to reach me. Her dad's phone line disconnected, which I discovered when I unblocked his number just for the entertainment value of seeing if he'd try to call. The number just went straight to that automated message that says the number you have dialed is no longer in service, which meant either he'd rage quit his phone carrier or, more likely, he hadn't paid his bill and they'd finally cut him off. Either way, it was poetic. Her mom posted a prayer emoji marathon on Facebook, which I saw because we were still technically friends on there even though I'd muted her posts years ago to preserve my sanity. It was just row after row of praying hands emojis, like if she posted enough of them, God would personally intervene and make this whole situation disappear. She'd written something vague about family going through trials and testing our faith, as if this was some kind of natural disaster that had randomly struck instead of the completely predictable consequence of years of financial irresponsibility and entitlement. The comments on her post were mostly from her church friends offering thoughts and prayers, which is nice and all, but notably doesn't come with a cash value that could help pay back the money they owed to actual dangerous people. Meanwhile, I was ordering extra syrup because nothing, and I mean absolutely nothing, tastes sweeter than poetic justice served with a side of blueberry compote. The waitress brought over a whole little pitcher of warm maple syrup, and I drowned those pancakes like I was drowning my old life in delicious breakfast condiments. Each bite was better than the last, and I'm pretty sure it wasn't just because the restaurant knew how to cook pancakes. It was because I was eating them as a free man, as someone who'd finally stopped setting himself on fire to keep other people warm. I took a photo of my pancakes, perfectly plated with fresh berries and a light dusting of powdered sugar, the morning light streaming through the window hitting them at just the right angle. I posted it to my own Instagram, which I rarely used, but figured this occasion warranted breaking my social media silence, with the caption, "Sometimes the best decision you can make is the one that looks selfish to people who are taking advantage of you." Also, these pancakes are incredible. Within minutes, the post had more engagement than anything I'd ever shared, with people I hadn't talked to in years coming out of the woodwork to leave supportive comments and fire emojis. Someone commented, "Living well is the best revenge, but those pancakes are a close second," and I laughed out loud in the middle of the restaurant, causing a few people to look over. I didn't care. I was done caring about what people thought, done worrying about maintaining appearances, done playing the role of the responsible one who always came through. If people wanted to judge me for walking away from a toxic situation, they could judge all they wanted from the cheap seats while I sat here in Seattle eating pancakes that cost $17 and were worth every single penny. My phone buzzed with a notification that Bianca had posted a follow-up video, apparently doubling down on her victim narrative, but I didn't watch it. I'd seen enough, gotten enough satisfaction from the initial meltdown, and now it was time to actually move forward instead of dwelling on the past. 2 days later, my lawyer Thomas called, and I could hear the amusement in his voice before he even said hello. That particular tone lawyers get when they're about to deliver news that's professionally interesting and personally entertaining. Thomas had been my attorney for about 5 years, handling everything from my business contracts to the prenup that Bianca now probably regretted insisting on. And he was one of those guys who'd seen enough crazy situations that nothing really surprised him anymore. But this, apparently, was special enough to warrant a personal call instead of just an email update. "You sure you're not coming back?" he asked, and I could hear him shuffling papers in the background, probably my file, which had gotten significantly thicker over the past 48 hours. Thomas had that old-school lawyer vibe where he still preferred physical documents over digital files, kept everything in manila folders that he'd label in his barely legible handwriting, and I'd always found it charming in a weird way, like he was cosplaying as a lawyer from a 1970s legal drama. "Not unless it's for the movie rights," I said, and I wasn't entirely joking because at this point, the way things were unfolding, Hollywood was probably already optioning this story. I could see it now, some dramatic thriller about a man who escapes financial abuse with nothing but a cardboard box and a flight to Seattle, starring someone moderately famous who'd win awards for portraying my particular brand of exhausted sarcasm. They'd probably change the ending, make it more dramatic, add a car chase or something, because apparently real life isn't exciting enough even when it involves fleeing your marriage in the middle of the night with receipts as your only weapon. Thomas laughed, that deep chuckle that suggested he'd seen some things in the past 2 days that were going to make this conversation very interesting. "Well, you might want to sit down for this one," he said, which is never a good sign but also sometimes is a great sign depending on which side of the situation you're on. And in this case, I had a feeling I was on the entertaining side. Apparently, and this is where things got really interesting in that "I told you so" kind of way that's incredibly satisfying when you're proven right about people being terrible. Bianca's family business got audited. Not randomly audited, not routine audited, but specifically audited by people who had questions about where all the money was going and why the numbers didn't add up and whether this was actually a legitimate business or just an elaborate front for siphoning money from investors who were now understandably upset about the whole situation. The IRS had gotten involved, which is never a good time for anyone, but especially not for people who've been playing fast and loose with the concept of business expenses versus personal spending. Apparently, Martin had been writing off everything as a business expense. The Italian wine tour, the luxury furniture in their personal home that was supposedly display inventory, Cynthia's spa treatments that were allegedly wellness expenses for maintaining a professional appearance, and even their country club membership that was theoretically for networking purposes, but was actually just so Martin could play golf and complain about his back nine performance. But here's where it got really good. The kind of good that makes you want to pump your fist in the air and yell justice, like you're in some kind of legal procedural TV show. Their so-called loans weren't actually loans at all. They were disguised luxury spending that they'd been trying to pass off as legitimate business debt. And guess whose name they'd tried to use as a guarantor without his knowledge or consent? That's right, yours truly. The guy who was currently sitting in a Seattle apartment eating takeout Thai food and living his best life approximately 3,000 miles away from this disaster. They'd forged my signature on documents, which is a special kind of stupid because we live in the digital age where handwriting analysis is a thing, and also I have copies of my actual signature on file with multiple banks and legal institutions. They'd put my name down as a co-signer for loans I'd never agreed to, used my credit score without permission to secure financing for their ridiculous furniture venture, and generally committed enough fraud to make a white-collar crime prosecutor salivate with excitement about their conviction rate statistics. But here's the beautiful part, the part that made me actually laugh out loud when Thomas told me, the part that proved that sometimes the universe has a sense of humor and timing. I'd already changed accounts, revoked all access, moved my assets into protected trusts, and basically disappeared from the financial grid as far as they were concerned. Every account they'd had access to was closed. Every credit card with my name attached was canceled. Every automatic payment that I'd been making for their various expenses was terminated. I'd spent the last 2 days systematically dismantling any financial connection I had to that family, and I'd done it with the kind of thorough precision that made Thomas actually say the words, "I'm impressed," which coming from a lawyer who'd been practicing for 30 years was basically the equivalent of a standing ovation. The prenup that Bianca had insisted on, the one she demanded back when we first got married because she was convinced her family's business ventures were going to make her independently wealthy and she wanted to protect her assets, that prenup was now protecting my assets instead. It clearly stated that any debts incurred by either party without the explicit written consent of the other party were that person's sole responsibility, which meant that all of Martin and Cynthia's business disasters, all of their fraudulent loans, all of their luxury spending disguised as business expenses, none of it could touch me. I was legally, completely, totally in the clear. Thomas chuckled again, and I could hear him taking a sip of what was probably his third coffee of the day because lawyers run on caffeine and billable hours. "You basically disappeared like Batman," he said, "but with receipts instead of a cape and a much better paper trail." I appreciated the superhero comparison, though I'd argue that Batman had it easier because he just had to fight criminals with elaborate themed gimmicks. He didn't have to deal with in-laws who thought a luxury furniture business for a market that didn't exist was a solid investment strategy. Meanwhile, Bianca was now trending online under the hashtag Box of Truth, which had taken on a life of its own in ways that I don't think anyone could have predicted. People were creating memes, writing think pieces about financial abuse in marriages, sharing their own stories of toxic family dynamics and the importance of boundaries. Someone had created a TikTok explaining the whole situation with receipts and documentation that they'd somehow pieced together from Bianca's public social media meltdown and public records, and it had millions of views. There were podcast episodes being recorded, relationship counselors using this as a case study, financial advisors warning people about the dangers of enabling family members' irresponsible spending habits. The story had taken on this weird viral life where it wasn't even really about me and Bianca anymore. It had become this larger conversation about accountability and boundaries and what happens when you finally stop setting yourself on fire to keep other people warm. People were picking apart every aspect of the situation, analyzing Bianca's Instagram videos frame by frame, finding inconsistencies in her narrative, discovering public records that showed her parents' history of failed businesses and unpaid debts going back years before I ever entered the picture. Thomas sent me a few of the news articles that had picked up the story, because apparently local news had nothing better to do than report on viral relationship drama, and the headlines were spectacular. "Man leaves marriage with box of receipts instead of alimony," read one. "Husband's gift to wife exposes years of financial exploitation," read another. My personal favorite was "The box that ended a marriage and started a movement," which felt a bit dramatic, but also kind of accurate given how many people were now talking about financial boundaries in relationships. 1 week later, my phone buzzed with that particular vibration pattern that means someone who's not in your contacts is trying to reach you. And in my experience, unknown numbers are either spam calls about my car's extended warranty or people I specifically don't want to talk to who figured out that I've blocked their regular number. I was sitting in my new favorite coffee shop in Seattle, one of those local places that takes their coffee so seriously they have a dedicated barista whose entire job is just steaming milk to the perfect microfoam consistency, when I saw "unknown number" flash across my screen. For a moment, I considered just letting it go to voicemail, but curiosity got the better of me. And also I'd had 2 excellent espressos already, so I was feeling confident and slightly wired in that way that makes you think you can handle anything the universe throws at you. I swiped to answer, bringing the phone to my ear with the kind of casual confidence that comes from knowing you hold all the cards and the person on the other end is probably holding a losing hand and a whole lot of regret. "Hello," I said, keeping my tone neutral and pleasant, like I was answering a call from someone trying to schedule a dentist appointment rather than from someone who'd spent the last week having a very public meltdown across multiple social media platforms. It was Bianca, and I knew it was her before she even spoke because I could hear her breathing, that particular rhythm of someone trying to compose themselves before launching into a conversation they've probably rehearsed in their head about 50 times. Her tone was the emotional equivalent of burnt toast, that specific quality of something that started out with potential but has been left unattended for too long and is now just bitter and charred and frankly inedible. It was the voice of someone who'd been crying, then angry crying, then rage posting on social media, then crying again, and was now trying to pull together some shred of dignity for this conversation. "You humiliated me," she snapped, and there it was, jumping straight past hello, straight past any attempt at civility or pleasantries, right into the accusation like we were picking up a fight that had been paused rather than starting a new conversation. Her voice had that edge of self-righteous fury that suggested she genuinely believed she was the victim in this situation, that somehow my decision to document years of financial exploitation and leave instead of bankrupting myself for her parents' terrible business decisions was the real crime here. "Technically," I said, taking a slow sip of my coffee for dramatic effect even though she couldn't see me, "you humiliated yourself. I just provided supporting documents." I kept my voice calm, almost cheerful, because nothing irritates angry people more than someone who refuses to match their energy, who stays collected while they're losing it. It's like trying to start a fire with wet wood. No matter how much heat you apply, it's just not going to catch. "You think this is funny?" she demanded, her voice going up an octave in that way it did when she was really working herself up, when she was transitioning from regular angry to the kind of angry where she'd start saying things she'd later claim she didn't mean, but absolutely did mean in the moment. I could picture her pacing, probably in her parents' house since I doubted she was still living in our place, wearing a path in whatever expensive carpet they'd bought with money they didn't have. "Not funny," I said, and I paused for effect, letting the silence hang there for just a beat longer than comfortable. "Hilarious." And I meant it too, because at this point, after everything that had happened, after watching her viral meltdown and the subsequent discovery of her family's fraud, and the beautiful karmic justice of it all, it had transcended regular funny and entered the territory of cosmically hilarious. It was the kind of situation that you'd read about and think, there's no way that's real, except it was real, and I was living it, and it was absolutely, undeniably hilarious. There was silence on the other end of the line, the kind of silence that's louder than words because you can feel the fury radiating through the phone. I imagined her standing there, phone gripped so tight her knuckles were probably white, trying to formulate a response that would make me feel guilty or ashamed or whatever emotion she was hoping to extract from this conversation. But I was 3,000 miles away, sitting in the sunshine with excellent coffee, and I'd spent the last week sleeping better than I had in years, so guilt wasn't really on the menu. Then I heard it, the sniffles, the slight catch in her breathing that meant tears were either actively happening or about to happen. And this was the part where she'd try to pivot from anger to sadness, from attacking to playing the victim, because that's what people do when their first emotional strategy isn't working. "We lost everything," she said, her voice smaller now, trying to sound broken and vulnerable in a way that would have worked on me a year ago, maybe even a month ago, but definitely wasn't working on me now. I sighed, not because I felt bad, but because this was so predictable it was almost boring. Bianca, we didn't lose everything, I said, emphasizing the we to make it clear that there was no we anymore. That ship had sailed, and I was the one who'd bought the ticket and burned the dock behind me. You still have your parents' vintage Ego collection, which based on current market value and the fact that it's apparently indestructible despite all evidence to the contrary, should be worth at least several $1,000,000 in sheer audacity alone. I could hear her sharp intake of breath, that little gasp that meant I'd hit a nerve, struck right at the heart of what was actually bothering her. It wasn't about the money, not really. It was about the fact that I'd stopped playing my assigned role, stopped being the safety net, stopped enabling the whole dysfunctional family circus that had been running for years with me as the primary sponsor and apparently the only person who thought it was insane. "How can you be so cruel?" she asked, and her voice was genuinely confused now, like she actually couldn't understand how I could be making jokes when her world was falling apart. She really, truly believed that I was the villain in this story, that my crime of stopping the money train was worse than years of taking advantage of my good nature and deep pockets. It was fascinating in a clinical sort of way, this complete inability to see her own role and how we'd ended up here. "Cruel would have been staying," I said, and my voice was serious now, not joking anymore, because this needed to be said clearly. "Cruel would have been continuing to enable your family's financial disasters and pretending like it was normal or sustainable or my responsibility to fix. Cruel would have been teaching you that this behavior is acceptable and that there are no consequences for treating people like ATMs with feelings. What I did was set a boundary, probably should have done it years ago, but better late than never, right?" She didn't have a response to that, or if she did, she didn't want to say it, because the silence stretched out between us like a chasm that no amount of words was going to bridge. I could hear her breathing, uneven and shaky, and I knew she was crying now. Real tears, not strategic tears, and part of me, a very small part that still remembered the person I'd married before everything went sideways, felt a tiny flicker of something that might have been sympathy, if sympathy wasn't exhausted from years of being the only emotion I was allowed to have in this relationship. "This isn't over," she finally said, and her voice had that edge of determination that suggested she was already planning her next move, already thinking about lawyers and arguments and ways to spin this situation back in her favor. "Actually," I said calmly, "it is. It's been over for a while. We were just the last ones to figure it out." "Well, I figured it out. You're still working on it apparently." She hung up without saying goodbye, and honestly, I wasn't surprised because Bianca had never been good at endings, had always preferred to just leave things unfinished and dangling rather than actually closing chapters properly. I looked at my phone screen for a moment, watched it fade to black, and then I did something I probably should have done years ago. I blocked the number, added it to my ever-growing list of blocked contacts that included her parents, her siblings, and various family friends who tried to reach out on her behalf with messages about working things out and family values. I turned off my phone completely, not just silent, but actually powered down, because I was done with this conversation, done with this chapter, done with being available for people who only called when they needed something. The barista caught my eye and asked if I wanted a refill, and I said yes because I had nowhere to be and nothing to do except sit here in the sunshine and enjoy the sound of silence that comes from finally putting your own needs first. Seattle became my new home, and not just in the logistical sense of this is where my mail gets delivered now, but in that deeper way where a place actually feels like it fits you instead of you constantly trying to contort yourself to fit into it. I rented a small apartment with a view of the bay, nothing fancy or Instagram-worthy, just a simple one-bedroom with hardwood floors that creaked in a charming way and windows that actually opened, which felt revolutionary after living in a house where everything was automated and climate-controlled and basically designed to make you forget that weather existed outside your perfectly temperature-regulated bubble. The apartment was in one of those older buildings that had character, which is real estate code for things don't always work perfectly, but it has charm, and I loved every imperfect inch of it. The refrigerator made a humming sound that was slightly louder than it should be. The bathroom tiles were original to the building, probably from the 1960s, in this mint green color that should have been hideous but somehow worked. The neighbors were a mix of young professionals and older folks who'd lived there for decades, and nobody cared about impressing anyone. Nobody was competing over who had the better car or the more expensive watch or whose vacation photos got more likes on social media. I started a consulting gig, something I'd been thinking about doing for years, but never had the mental energy to actually pursue because all my energy was being drained by managing other people's crises and disasters. Turns out when you're not spending 40 hours a week being someone's emotional support ATM, you actually have time and brain space to focus on your own career and interests and goals. The consulting work was in my field, helping small businesses with their financial planning and strategy, which felt deliciously ironic given that I'd just escaped from a family that thought financial planning meant hoping really hard that money would materialize when you needed it. My clients were people who actually wanted help, who took my advice seriously, who implemented the strategies I suggested, and then came back with results and gratitude instead of new problems and demands. It was shocking how much I enjoyed working with people who valued my expertise instead of just viewing me as a resource to be extracted. I set my own hours, worked from coffee shops in my apartment, and sometimes from the park when the weather was nice, and I made enough money to live comfortably without the constant anxiety of wondering when the next financial emergency would hit. I rediscovered peace, which sounds dramatic, but I'm being completely serious when I say I'd forgotten what it felt like to just exist without waiting for the other shoe to drop. Peace, it turns out, is waking up on a Saturday morning without immediately checking your phone to see if someone's texted you about an emergency that requires your immediate financial intervention. Peace is eating dinner without mentally calculating how much this meal costs compared to how much you've already spent this month on other people's problems. Peace is going to bed at night without that knot in your stomach that comes from knowing you're living a life that doesn't actually align with your values or desires. I learned that silence is powerful, more powerful than any argument or explanation or attempt to make someone understand your perspective when they're fundamentally incapable of seeing past their own needs. You can't argue with someone who's already gone, and there's something beautifully final about that. Something clean and decisive that doesn't leave room for the endless back-and-forth negotiations that never actually resolve anything. Silence says, I'm done engaging with this dynamic, in a way that words never quite can, because words invite response and debate and the possibility of being worn down over time. Friends asked if I'd ever forgive Bianca, and I appreciated that they asked instead of just assuming I should or lecturing me about the importance of forgiveness like it's some kind of moral obligation regardless of circumstances. These were my real friends, the ones who'd watched me slowly disappear into my marriage over the years, who'd bitten their tongues and tried to be supportive while clearly seeing that something was deeply wrong with the whole situation. Now they were asking if I'd forgive her, and I could tell they were genuinely curious about my answer, not judging, just wondering. Sure, I said, leaning back in my chair at the bar where we'd met up for drinks, surrounded by people who actually cared about me as a person rather than as a financial solution. As soon as my laughter stops echoing in her mansion of regrets, I'll consider forgiveness. So probably never, but never say never. They laughed because they knew I was half joking and half serious. That particular combination of humor and genuine feeling that real friendship allows you to express without judgment. The truth was, forgiveness felt like the wrong word for what I was experiencing. I wasn't angry anymore, wasn't dwelling on what had happened or plotting revenge beyond the extremely satisfying box of receipts that had already been delivered. I was just done, completely and totally finished with that chapter of my life. And moving forward without looking back didn't require forgiveness. It just required commitment to my own well-being and boundaries. Forgiveness implies that someone did something wrong and you're choosing to let it go. But what I was doing was recognizing that I'd participated in an unhealthy dynamic for too long, and I was choosing something different now. She sent one last message weeks later, and I only saw it because I'd unblocked her number briefly to check if she was still trying to contact me. Morbid curiosity getting the better of me one evening when I'd had a glass of wine and was feeling reflective. The message was short, accusatory, and completely lacking in any self-awareness. You ruined my family. I stared at it for a moment, sitting on my couch with my laptop balanced on my knees, the glow of the screen the only light in the room as evening settled over Seattle outside my windows. I could have ignored it, Could have blocked the number again and never responded, but something about the sheer audacity of that statement demanded a response, required one final clarification before I closed this door permanently. I replied, and my response was even shorter than her message, just 11 words that contained more truth than all the conversations we'd had over the years combined. No, I just stopped sponsoring it. There's a difference. I hit send, then immediately blocked the number again. This time with the kind of finality that comes from knowing you've said everything that needs to be said, and anything more would just be repetition. Her family wasn't ruined because of me. Her family was ruined because they'd built their entire existence on a foundation of other people's money and questionable decisions. And eventually that foundation crumbled the way unsustainable things always do. I just happened to be the support beam that finally said enough and stepped away. And yes, that meant the structure collapsed. But that's not the support beam's fault. That's the architect's fault for designing something that couldn't stand on its own. I started going to therapy, which was something I'd considered before, but never prioritized because I was always too busy dealing with everyone else's problems to address my own. My therapist was this middle-aged woman named Dr. Patterson who had an office that smelled like lavender and always had a box of tissues within arm's reach. And she had this way of asking questions that made you realize things about yourself that you'd been avoiding for years. We talked about boundaries and codependency and the difference between being helpful and being enabling. And slowly I started to understand how I'd ended up in that situation in the first place. Turns out, I had this thing where I equated my value with my usefulness, where I believed that being loved meant being needed, and Bianca's family had recognized that vulnerability and exploited it. Probably not consciously or maliciously, but exploited it nonetheless. Dr. Patterson helped me see that real love doesn't demand constant sacrifice, that healthy relationships involve reciprocity and respect, and the understanding that everyone's needs matter, not just the loudest or most persistent person's needs. It was revolutionary. Honestly, this idea that I could say no to things without being a bad person, that I could prioritize my own well-being without being selfish. 3 months later, I stood at the same airport where it all began, except this time I was flying for pleasure instead of escape. And let me tell you, there's a world of difference between those two experiences. I was heading to Portland for a weekend hiking trip with some new friends I'd made through a meetup group, the kind of spontaneous plan that happens when you're not constantly budgeting for other people's emergencies and can actually afford to live your own life. Bianca's parents declared bankruptcy, which I learned through the grapevine of mutual acquaintances who still felt the need to keep me updated even though I'd made it clear I didn't care. Apparently, the luxury furniture business collapsed spectacularly, taking with it their savings, their credit, and whatever dignity they'd managed to maintain through years of terrible decisions. The investors they owed money to were not amused, and last I heard, Martin was working at a big-box hardware store explaining the difference between wood stains to customers who definitely didn't need his level of unwanted expertise. Bianca reportedly moved in with her aunt and started selling motivational mugs online, those generic inspirational quote mugs that say things like "family first" and "blood is thicker than water," which was so ironic it almost felt like performance art. I almost bought one just for the sheer entertainment value of drinking my morning coffee from a mug that said "family first" while sitting in my peaceful Seattle apartment, completely free from family drama. Almost, but not quite, because that would have required me to visit her online store, and I wasn't about to give her the satisfaction of even a single-page view. Sometimes I rewatch the doorbell footage from that morning, not out of spite or bitterness, but as a reminder that freedom has a soundtrack, and in my case, it was her scream echoing across the porch when she opened that box. It was my screensaver for a while, just the frozen frame of her face mid-realization, which probably made me seem petty to anyone who saw my phone, but I didn't care because it reminded me of the exact moment I took my life back. Now, when people asked about my marriage at parties or networking events, I smiled and delivered my standard line with perfect comedic timing. It ended with a box. And that's the first time she ever opened something I gave her willingly. The joke always landed, people always laughed, and sometimes someone would recognize the story from social media, and we'd have a whole conversation about boundaries and financial abuse and the importance of knowing when to walk away. Then I'd raise my coffee, or my beer, or whatever I was drinking at the moment, and toast quietly to myself, to peace, to humor, to walking away without paying a dime more than I already had, to freedom, to boundaries, to the revolutionary act of choosing yourself when everyone else expects you to choose them, to cardboard boxes and receipts, and the beautiful finality of closing a door that should have been closed years ago. The plane was boarding, and as I walked down the jetway toward my weekend of hiking and laughter and living a life I actually enjoyed, I felt lighter than air, like I'd finally figured out the secret that took too long to learn. Sometimes the best investment you can make is in your own peace of mind. And sometimes the most valuable thing you can do is absolutely nothing at all for people who never appreciated you in the first place. My rich wife chose to dance with her boss, just to show who is in control. Her attractive colleague came up, "If you're free, take mu epsilon." The next second, my wife ran up in a panic. "Look, I need you to understand something right off the bat. I wasn't snooping. I know how this sounds. I really do. Like every guilty husband who's ever been caught scrolling through his wife's phone at 3 in the morning with one hand on the screen and the other clutching a half-eaten bag of Doritos. But that wasn't me. I'm not that guy. I don't go digging through Clara's emails like some paranoid detective in a bad Netflix thriller where everyone's got a secret and the lighting is always weirdly blue. No, I was just thirsty. Parched, actually. You know that kind of thirst that hits you at 2 in the morning when your mouth feels like you've been chewing on sandpaper and the only thing standing between you and sweet hydration is a flight of stairs and your wife's laptop glowing in the dark like some kind of digital oracle? Yeah, that was me. Just a simple man with simple needs, stumbling through our home office in my boxers and a t-shirt that had seen better days, probably around 2019, trying not to stub my toe on the corner of the desk that Clara insists stays exactly where it is because feng shui or something. I wasn't even planning to look at her laptop. Hell, I wasn't planning to look at anything except maybe the inside of the refrigerator, and whatever leftover pizza was calling my name from behind the milk carton. But then her screen lit up. Just like that. No warning, no dramatic music, just a sudden burst of light that made me freeze like a deer caught in headlights. Except instead of headlights, it was a MacBook Pro, and instead of a deer, I was just a confused dude holding an empty glass. The email notification sat there, bold and accusatory. Stratosphere Gala, RSVP confirmed. I blinked at it, then blinked again, because surely I was misreading this. The Stratosphere Gala. Not the Stratosphere work thing, or the Stratosphere mandatory boring corporate event where everyone pretends to like each other. No, this was a gala. With a capital G. The kind of event where people wear things that cost more than my car payment and drink champagne that probably has its own Instagram account. And my wife, Clara, the woman who tells me everything from what she had for lunch to the exact tone of voice her coworker used when asking about her weekend, had signed up for it without mentioning a single word to me. Now, let me paint you a picture of Clara. She's the kind of person who narrates her entire day like she's giving a TED Talk to an invisible audience. I know when the grocery store is out of organic quinoa. I know when her Zoom meeting runs 5 minutes long. I know when someone in her department sneezes in a way that sounds passive-aggressive. She once spent 20 minutes explaining why avocados were overpriced at Whole Foods, complete with a breakdown of import costs and seasonal availability. So for her to keep something like this under wraps, that's like Beyoncé dropping an album without telling anyone. It just doesn't happen. I stood there for a solid minute, glass in hand, staring at that email like it was going to suddenly explain itself. Maybe it would expand into a friendly message that said, "Just kidding. This is actually a boring spreadsheet conference, and you're totally invited." But it didn't. It just sat there, glowing with all the confidence of a secret that had just been caught red-handed. So I did what any rational human being would do. I waited. I went back to bed, drank my water, and lay there staring at the ceiling like I was trying to decode the meaning of life, which at that moment felt a lot less complicated than whatever the hell was going on with my wife. The next morning, I played it cool. I made coffee, scrolled through my phone, pretended to care about the news, and then, casually, like I was asking about the weather, I dropped the bomb. "So, when were you going to tell me about the Stratosphere Gala?" I said it with a smile, the kind of smile that says, I'm totally fine and definitely not spiraling into a pit of confusion and mild betrayal. Clara looked up from her yogurt, and for a split second, I swear I saw something flicker across her face. Panic? Guilt? Indigestion? Hard to say. But then she blinked, And just like that, she was back to being Clara, the calm, collected woman who could sell ice to a polar bear and make you feel good about it. "Oh, that?" she said, waving her spoon like she was swatting away a fly. "It's just a boring work thing. You know how it is. Corporate stuff, networking, people standing around pretending to enjoy themselves while discussing quarterly reports. Super dull." She said it so smoothly, so effortlessly, that for a second I almost believed her. Almost. But then my brain kicked in, the part that had read that email, the part that knew what a gala was, and I thought, yeah, because formal dress codes and rooftop champagne absolutely scream, boring work thing. Right. And I'm the Queen of England. I nodded, still smiling, because what else was I supposed to do? Accuse her right there over breakfast like we were in some kind of daytime soap opera? "Oh, cool," I said. "Sounds fun. Maybe I could tag along. I've got a suit somewhere in the closet that probably still fits. Could be a nice date night, you know?" I said it lightly, like I was suggesting we grab tacos, not crash a fancy corporate event. But the way her face changed, oh man, the way her face changed, it was like I'd just suggested we rob a bank together. Her eyes went wide, her jaw tightened, and for a moment, just a brief, beautiful moment, she looked like a computer trying to process a command it didn't understand. You know, like when you click something and the screen just freezes and you see that little spinning wheel of death. Yeah, that was Clara's face. "You can't," she said, and the speed at which those words left her mouth was almost impressive. Not, "You shouldn't," or "Maybe it's not the best idea," or even "Let me check if there's space." Just flat out, no negotiation, case closed, "You can't." And let me tell you something, when your wife uses the word can't instead of won't, that's not a suggestion. That's a steel door slamming shut with a deadbolt, a chain lock, and probably some kind of biometric security system for good measure. That's a red flag so big it could be seen from space, waving proudly in the wind with little Wi-Fi signals emanating from it like some kind of digital distress beacon. I kept my cool, though. I'm good at that. Years of corporate meetings and dealing with passive-aggressive emails from coworkers named Brad have trained me well. "Of course, sweetheart," I said, still smiling, still stirring my coffee like we were having the most normal conversation in the world. "Wouldn't want to ruin your boring evening." I emphasized the word boring just enough to let her know I wasn't buying it, but not enough to start World War III over scrambled eggs. She smiled back, relieved, probably thinking she'd dodged a bullet. Poor Clara. She had no idea that in my mind, I was already lacing up my shoes, ironing my shirt, and planning my grand entrance like I was about to crash the Oscars. Because here's the thing, when someone you love starts keeping secrets, it doesn't matter how small or insignificant they claim those secrets are. A secret is a crack in the foundation, and cracks have a funny way of spreading when you're not looking. And me? I was done not looking. I was done being the guy who nodded and smiled and trusted blindly, while the woman I married waltzed off to fancy galas without so much as a "Hey, wanna come?" So yeah, I smiled politely that morning. I kissed her on the cheek, told her to have a great day, and watched her leave for work like nothing had changed. But everything had changed. And Friday night, at 7:15 p.m., on the rooftop of the Century Plaza Hotel, Clara was going to find out just how much. Friday night rolled around with all the inevitability of a tax deadline, and there I was, standing outside the Century Plaza Hotel at exactly 7:15 p.m., looking up at this gleaming tower of glass and steel like I was about to infiltrate a secret society. Which, in a way, I guess I was. The hotel was one of those places that screams, "You probably can't afford to breathe our air," with its marble columns and revolving doors that moved so smoothly they might as well have been powered by the tears of struggling artists. Valets in crisp uniforms were parking cars that cost more than my college education, and women in dresses that probably required engineering degrees to construct were gliding through the entrance like they were floating on clouds made of champagne and privilege. I told Clara I had a poker night with the guys. She'd looked relieved, actually relieved, when I said I wouldn't be home until late. That right there should have told me everything I needed to know, but I was already committed to this mission. I'd even gone the extra mile and dusted off my good suit, the charcoal gray one I'd bought for my cousin's wedding 3 years ago and had worn exactly twice since then. It still fit, thank God, though it was a little snug around the waist because apparently those midnight pizza runs had been more consistent than my gym attendance. I'd shaved, combed my hair, Even splashed on some cologne that the guy at Macy's had promised would make me irresistible. I didn't need to be irresistible. I just needed to blend in long enough to figure out what the hell my wife was hiding. The elevator ride to the rooftop felt like it took about 17 years, each floor ticking by with the kind of slow, deliberate pace that gives you way too much time to question your life choices. What was I doing? Was I really about to crash my wife's work event like some jealous sitcom husband? Yes, I absolutely was. Because when your wife tells you that you can't come to something, that's not just a closed door. That's a door with a neon sign that says, "Secrets inside. Please investigate." And I've never been good at following instructions anyway. The rooftop was exactly what you'd expect from an event called the Stratosphere Gala. Glass chandeliers hung from the ceiling like frozen waterfalls, catching the light and throwing it around the room in a way that probably violated several laws of physics. The bar stretched along one entire wall, staffed by bartenders who looked like they'd trained at some elite cocktail academy where the entry exam involved juggling bottles while reciting the periodic table. A jazz band was set up in the corner, playing the kind of smooth, sophisticated music that makes you feel like you should be discussing stock portfolios and vacation homes in the Hamptons, even if your actual financial situation involves figuring out which bills you can pay late this month. And the people. Oh man, the people. This was clearly where all the corporate success stories came to see and be seen. Men in suits that fit so perfectly they might as well have been painted on. Women in dresses that cost more than my monthly rent. Everyone holding wine glasses and laughing at jokes that probably weren't even funny, but sounded sophisticated anyway. It was like watching a nature documentary about a species I'd only read about. The corporate elite, native to rooftop bars and country clubs, known for their expensive watches and ability to network while appearing completely relaxed. I grabbed a drink from the bar. Some kind of fancy cocktail with a name I couldn't pronounce that tasted like someone had liquefied money and poured it over ice, and positioned myself near a group of potted plants that provided decent cover. I'm not short, but I'm not exactly NBA material either, so staying inconspicuous in a crowd isn't too difficult as long as you look like you belong. And brother, I committed to that role. I nodded at strangers like we were old friends. I checked my phone periodically like I was expecting important business calls. I even laughed along with nearby conversations, even though I had no idea what they were talking about. Something about quarterly projections and market disruption. Real edge-of-your-seat stuff. And then I saw her. Clara, my wife. Looking absolutely stunning in a red dress that I'd never seen before, which meant she'd bought it specifically for this event and somehow never mentioned it during any of her usual shopping debriefs. Her hair was done up in one of those complicated styles that probably required an engineering degree and several YouTube tutorials. She was wearing heels that added about 3 inches to her height and probably subtracted about 3 hours from her ability to walk comfortably. And she was glowing. Not in the metaphorical sense. I mean, she was literally glowing, radiating this energy that made people turn their heads when she walked by. She looked happy, confident, like she was exactly where she belonged. What she didn't look like was someone attending a boring work thing. Half the room was watching her, and she knew it. She moved through the crowd with the easy grace of someone who'd done this 1,000 times, stopping to chat with clusters of people, laughing at the right moments, touching arms in that casual but intentional way that says, "I'm comfortable here. I'm one of you." And then I saw him. Richard, her boss. The man I'd heard about in passing during dinner conversations, but had never actually met, because Clara always seemed to have a reason why bringing me to company events wouldn't be appropriate, or might be awkward. Richard was exactly what you'd picture when you hear the phrase successful corporate executive. Tall, probably 6'2" or 6'3", with the kind of silver hair that didn't make him look old, just distinguished. He wore his suit like it was a second skin, and when he laughed, which he did often, it was the kind of laugh that filled a room and made you feel like you were missing out on the joke. Clara spotted him immediately. I watched her face light up in a way that made something in my chest tighten uncomfortably. She glided over to him. And yes, I'm using the word glided because there's no other way to describe the way she moved through that crowd like she was on rails. And when she reached him, she touched his arm. Just a light touch, nothing overtly inappropriate, but it lasted a beat too long. He leaned down to say something in her ear, and she laughed, tilting her head back in a way that I recognized because it was the same laugh she'd used when we first started dating, back when everything was new and exciting and the world felt full of possibility. That's when she saw me. Her eyes swept across the room in that casual way people do when they're checking out their surroundings, and then they landed on me standing there by the potted plants like some kind of discount private investigator. For exactly half a second, and I'm being precise here because I was counting, her smile faltered. The confidence flickered. Her eyes went wide, and I saw something flash across her face that looked an awful lot like panic. But then, and this is what really got me, she recovered. Just like that. Like flipping a switch. The smile came back, bigger and brighter than before, and she started walking toward me with her arms slightly outstretched like I was a surprise guest on a talk show. "Mark," she said, and her voice had that performance quality to it, like she was addressing an audience instead of her husband. "You came. I thought you had poker night." She reached me and gave me a hug that felt more like a tactical maneuver than genuine affection, the kind of hug you give someone when there are witnesses and you need to maintain appearances. I hugged her back, playing along, because two could play this game. Poker night got canceled. I lied smoothly, returning her performance with one of my own. "Jimmy's kid got sick. Figured I'd surprise you instead. You know, see what all the fuss was about with this boring work thing." I emphasized those last 3 words just enough to let her know I remembered exactly how she described this event. Her smile tightened almost imperceptibly at the corners. "Well, isn't that sweet?" she said, and I couldn't tell if she was being genuine or if she wanted to strangle me with her designer clutch. Probably both. "Come on, let me introduce you to some people." She linked her arm through mine with just a little too much force, steering me away from my plant fortress and into the crowd like she was a border collie herding a particularly stubborn sheep. For the next hour, I played the role of the dutiful husband, shaking hands with people whose names I forgot immediately, nodding along to conversations about corporate synergy and paradigm shifts, and watching Clara work the room like a seasoned politician. But I also watched her watch Richard. Every few minutes, her eyes would drift across the room to wherever he was standing, tracking him like a hawk tracking a rabbit. And when he looked back at her, there was something in that exchange that made my jaw clench. It wasn't just professional respect. It wasn't just friendly acknowledgement. It was something else, something that made me feel like I was standing outside a window watching a scene I wasn't supposed to see. Around 9 o'clock, the music shifted from sophisticated jazz to something slower, something that apparently signaled it was time for people to pretend they knew how to dance. And Clara, my beautiful wife who had spent the entire evening maintaining a careful distance from Richard while still orbiting around him like a moon around a planet, finally made her move. I watched her excuse herself from whatever conversation she was pretending to care about, watched her smooth down her dress, watched her walk across that rooftop with purpose and confidence, heading straight for Richard like she'd been waiting all night for this exact moment. She didn't look back at me, not even once. You know that moment in a movie where everything goes into slow motion and the music swells, and you realize you're watching something you can't unsee? Yeah, that's exactly what happened at approximately 9:07 p.m. on that godforsaken rooftop. The jazz band transitioned from there, where sophisticated background noise, playlist to something slower, something that I can only describe as let's make terrible decisions set to a saxophone. The lighting dimmed just enough to make everything feel intimate and romantic, which was apparently the universal signal for people to stop pretending they were at a professional networking event and start pretending they were in some kind of corporate romance novel. And Clara, my wife, my partner, the woman who promised to love, honor, and apparently keep giant secrets from me, she took the bait like a fish that had been starving for weeks. I watched her cross that dance floor with the kind of determination usually reserved for Black Friday shoppers heading toward a 70% off television. She walked straight up to Richard, who was standing near the edge of the rooftop looking out at the city lights like he was posing for the cover of Successful Douchebags Monthly, and she smiled at him. Not the polite, professional smile you give your boss at a work function. No, this was the smile. The one that says, "I've been thinking about this moment all night, and possibly for several weeks prior." He turned to her, and I swear to God, he didn't even look surprised. Not even a little bit. It was like he'd been expecting this, like they'd choreographed this whole thing during one of their totally innocent closed-door meetings that I'm sure were all about quarterly reports and definitely not about whatever the hell I was witnessing right now. She said something to him. I was too far away to hear, but I could see her lips moving and him nodding. And then she did it. She put her hand on his arm. Just rested it there, casual as you please, like she was touching a piece of furniture and not her married boss at a company event, while her husband stood 15 feet away holding a drink that suddenly tasted like betrayal with a twist of lime. Richard placed his hand on the small of her back. Let me repeat that for emphasis, the small of her back. That intimate little spot that guys only touch when they're dancing with someone they're comfortable with, someone they've touched before, someone who isn't going to file an HR complaint because this clearly isn't the first time. And then they started dancing. Slow, close, confident. Like they'd done this before. Like this was routine. Like I wasn't standing right there watching my marriage dissolve to the soundtrack of a Kenny G wannabe. They moved together with the kind of synchronization that doesn't happen by accident. Clara leaned into him. Actually leaned into him. Her head tilted at that angle that she used to use with me back when we still danced at weddings, and she still looked at me like I was someone worth leaning into. His hand stayed firmly planted on her back, and her hand, her hand, slid from his arm up to his shoulder in a movement so natural, so practiced, that it might as well have had "We've done this before" tattooed across it in neon letters. I stayed seated at my table, which was tucked in the corner near the bar, sipping my overpriced cocktail like it was the most fascinating beverage I'd ever encountered. Because what else was I supposed to do? Storm across the dance floor like some jealous caveman and drag my wife away by her hair? Start throwing punches at a guy who probably had lawyers on speed dial and could buy and sell me 17 times before breakfast? No, I'm classier than that. Or at least, I like to think I am. So I sat there, watching the free entertainment, because if I was going to have my heart broken on a rooftop in downtown Los Angeles, I might as well have a good view of it. People were staring. Oh, they were definitely staring. I could see it in my peripheral vision. Heads turning, whispers being exchanged behind champagne flutes, eyebrows being raised so high they were practically in orbit. Apparently, Clara and Richard dancing together wasn't just mildly noteworthy. It was the kind of scandal that made the rumor mill work overtime. A woman to my left leaned over to her companion and whispered something that made them both look in Clara's direction with expressions that ranged from shock to barely concealed glee. A guy near the bar was recording the whole thing on his phone, probably already composing the group text that would make Monday morning at the office extra spicy. And me? I just nodded at them. Literally nodded. Made eye contact with a few of the gawkers and gave them a little, "Yeah, that's my wife auditioning for HR's worst nightmare" head bob. What else was I going to do? Cry? Scream? Flip over the table like I was in a bad telenovela? I'm a grown man with at least a shred of dignity left, and I wasn't about to give these corporate vultures the satisfaction of seeing me lose it. If Clara wanted to humiliate herself in front of her entire company, that was her choice. I was just along for the ride at this point, collecting evidence for what was inevitably going to be a very interesting conversation later. The song kept playing, and they kept dancing, and I kept drinking, and the whole thing felt like some kind of surreal fever dream where the universe had decided to test exactly how much awkwardness one human being could endure before spontaneously combusting. Clara's dress swished as they turned, catching the light in a way that would have been beautiful if I wasn't currently experiencing what I can only describe as emotional food poisoning. Richard said something that made her laugh, that same laugh from earlier, the one that used to be reserved for me. And she threw her head back in a gesture so theatrical it could have won an Oscar. That's when I heard the voice behind me. "If you're free, take me." The words cut through the music and the murmur of scandal-hungry onlookers, and I turned around to find myself face to face with someone I hadn't expected. She was tall. Like, legitimately tall, probably 5'10" even without the heels she was wearing, with dark brunette hair that fell past her shoulders in waves that looked effortless, but probably required about 3 hours and several expensive products to achieve. She had the kind of smile that was equal parts mischievous and sympathetic, like she knew exactly what kind of train wreck I was living through and wanted to help, while also being slightly amused by the whole situation. I recognized her vaguely from earlier in the evening. One of the many faces I'd nodded at while pretending to be engaged in conversations about market trends and corporate synergy. But now, up close, I could see she had these sharp green eyes that looked intelligent and slightly dangerous, like she was the kind of person who always knew more than she let on. She was holding a glass of red wine and wearing a black dress that was elegant without being flashy, professional without being boring. She looked like someone who had her life together, which automatically made her more functional than about 70% of the people in this room, myself included. "Excuse me," I said, because apparently my brain had decided that confusion was the appropriate response to a beautiful woman offering to dance with me while my wife was currently wrapped around her boss like plastic wrap on leftovers. She gestured toward the dance floor with her wine glass, that smile never faltering. "You're sitting here watching your wife make a spectacle of herself. Everyone's staring at you like you're the entertainment, and you look like you're about to either start crying or flip this table. So I'm offering you an out. Dance with me. Even the playing field. Show these people you're not just going to sit here and take it." She said it matter-of-factly, like she was suggesting we grab coffee, not proposing we stage a counteroffensive in the middle of a corporate gala. I looked at her, then back at Clara, who was still thoroughly absorbed in her performance with Richard, completely oblivious to anything happening outside her little bubble of poor decision-making. Then I looked back at this mystery woman who was either the most helpful stranger I'd ever met or completely insane. Possibly both. "Wow," I said, setting down my drink. "You people really take networking seriously here." I was going for sarcasm, but it came out sounding more tired than witty. She laughed anyway, a genuine sound that made some of the tension in my shoulders ease up slightly. "I'm Sophie," she said, extending her free hand. "I work with your wife." "Well, I work in the same company as your wife. Different department, thank God. I've been watching this disaster unfold for about 20 minutes now, and I figured someone should probably rescue you from public humiliation before you become a full-blown meme by Monday morning." She was direct, I'll give her that. No corporate speak, no dancing around the subject. Just straight facts delivered with a side of dark humor. I shook her hand, noting that she had a firm grip, the kind that suggested she didn't mess around, and probably terrified junior executives in meetings. "Mark," I said, and rescue is a strong word, but I appreciate the thought. Though I should warn you that dancing with me might actually make this situation worse. I'm not exactly Fred Astaire over here. Sophie shrugged, already setting down her wine glass on a nearby table. "Neither is your wife, based on what I'm seeing out there, but she seems to be managing just fine. Come on, let's give them something to talk about besides the obvious." She held out her hand expectantly, and I realized she wasn't going to take no for an answer. Which, honestly, was probably for the best, because left to my own devices I would have just sat there marinating in my feelings until I either left or did something dramatically stupid. I stood up, straightened my jacket, and took her hand. "If I die tonight," I said as she led me toward the dance floor, "please make sure my tombstone says he danced bravely and not he sat there like a chump while his wife slow danced with her boss." Sophie laughed again, and we stepped onto the floor just as the band transitioned into another slow song. "Deal," she said. "Now put your hand on my waist and try not to step on my feet. And maybe smile a little. You look like you're about to attend a funeral." "I am attending a funeral," I muttered, placing my hand where she'd indicated. "It's just that the deceased is my marriage and the wake is happening in real time." And with that cheerful thought, we started dancing. The moment Sophie and I stepped onto that dance floor, I swear the temperature dropped about 5 degrees. And I'm not talking about the air conditioning kicking in. I'm talking about the sudden Arctic blast of pure, concentrated rage that radiated from my wife's general direction like she was a human ice machine set to deep freeze. I could feel her eyes on us before I even saw her. That particular sensation you get when someone is staring at you with enough intensity to bore holes through steel. It was the kind of look that could wilt flowers, curdle milk, and make small children cry. The kind of look that says, "We're going to have a conversation later, and you're not going to enjoy it." Sophie positioned my hand properly on her waist. Apparently, I'd been holding her like I was afraid she'd break, which, fair, because I hadn't danced with anyone except Clara in about 7 years, and my muscle memory was rusty at best. "Relax," she whispered, her breath smelling faintly of wine and mint. "You look like you're defusing a bomb. We're just dancing, moving to music. It's not that complicated. Easy for you to say," I muttered back, trying not to make eye contact with Clara, who I could see in my peripheral vision had gone completely rigid mid-dance. You're not the one whose wife looks like she's about to spontaneously combust and take half the building with her. Sophie glanced over my shoulder, caught sight of Clara's expression, and actually smiled. Like, genuinely smiled. The kind of smile people get when they're watching a particularly entertaining reality TV show. "Oh wow," she said, her voice full of barely suppressed amusement. "If looks could kill, I'd be a pile of ashes right now, and you'd be, I don't know, whatever comes after ashes. Subatomic particles, maybe." She moved us into a gentle turn, which I managed to follow without stepping on her feet, a small miracle that I was oddly proud of. But hey, at least she's paying attention to you now. That's progress, right? I wanted to argue with her logic, but honestly, she had a point. For the first time all evening, Clara was fully aware of my existence. Not just aware, hyper-aware, laser-focused, completely and utterly tuned in to exactly what I was doing and who I was doing it with. It was like I'd suddenly become visible after spending hours as background noise. "You're welcome, by the way," Sophie added, spinning us again with practiced ease, "for providing you with the first genuine emotion your wife has directed at you all night. Even if that emotion is homicidal fury. If I die tonight," I said, echoing my earlier joke, "put he danced bravely on my tombstone." Sophie laughed, the sound cutting through the tension like a knife through butter, and I felt some of the knots in my shoulders start to loosen. We danced casually, nothing romantic or inappropriate. She kept a respectful distance. Our movements were strictly PG-rated, and we mostly just swayed to the music while making sarcastic commentary about our surroundings. But apparently, respectful and appropriate wasn't the vibe Clara was picking up on. She'd frozen mid-step, her entire body going stiff like someone had hit the pause button on a remote control. Richard was saying something to her, probably trying to figure out why his dance partner had suddenly turned into a statue, but she wasn't listening. Her eyes were locked on Sophie and me with the kind of focus usually reserved for professional snipers or people trying to read the fine print on prescription medication bottles. And then, because apparently standing there glaring wasn't dramatic enough, she ditched Richard. Just straight up abandoned him in the middle of the dance floor like a kid dropping a toy they'd gotten bored with, and power walked toward us with a stride that could only be described as CEO about to fire the entire department. The crowd parted for her like the Red Sea, people literally stepping aside to avoid being caught in the blast radius of whatever explosion was about to happen. Her heels clicked against the floor with each step. Click, click, click. Like a countdown timer on a bomb. Her face had that carefully neutral expression that only comes from years of corporate training. The kind of face that says, "I'm perfectly calm and rational," while every other part of her body language screams, "I'm about to commit a felony." She reached us just as the song hit a particularly smooth instrumental section, stopped directly in front of Sophie and me, and plastered on the fakest smile I'd ever seen. And I've seen a lot of fake smiles. I've worked in corporate America for over a decade. This smile was special. This smile had its own zip code. "Mark," she said, her voice somehow managing to sound sweet, while also carrying undertones of, "I'm planning your murder. Can I talk to you?" Sophie, bless her heart, didn't miss a beat. We kept swaying gently to the music, and she responded before I could even open my mouth. "We're dancing," she said pleasantly, like she was commenting on the weather. "Don't worry, Clara. I'm keeping him safe. He hasn't stepped on my feet even once. You should be proud." The smile she gave my wife was so innocent, so completely devoid of malice, that it was almost aggressive in its sweetness. It was a masterclass in polite warfare. Clara's smile cracked slightly at the edges, tiny fissures appearing in her carefully constructed facade. Her left eye twitched, just once, barely noticeable unless you'd been married to her for 7 years and knew all her tells. "Now," she said, dropping the sweet tone entirely. That one word carried enough weight to sink a battleship. It wasn't a request. It wasn't even a demand. It was a statement of fact, a declaration of war, a line drawn in the sand with a permanent marker and possibly some barbed wire. I looked at Sophie, then back at Clara, then at the growing number of people who had stopped pretending to dance and were now just openly watching this unfold like it was the season finale of their favorite show. The jazz band was still playing, oblivious to the domestic drama unfolding on their watch. Richard stood awkwardly near the edge of the floor, looking like he desperately wanted to be anywhere else, possibly on a different planet or in a different dimension entirely. We'll talk after this song, I said calmly, channeling every ounce of zen-like composure I'd picked up from years of dealing with difficult clients and passive-aggressive project managers. Sophie and I continued our gentle sway, acting like we were having the time of our lives, like this was the most natural thing in the world, like there wasn't a woman standing 3 feet away radiating enough negative energy to power a small city. Clara's face went through several interesting color changes, from pale to pink to a shade of red that should probably have a medical term associated with it. Her hands clenched into fists at her sides, her perfectly manicured nails digging into her palms. Her jaw was so tight, I'm surprised her teeth didn't crack from the pressure. For a moment, just a brief, beautiful moment, I thought she might actually explode right there on the dance floor, just detonate like a cartoon character with steam coming out of her ears. But she didn't explode. She was too well trained for that, too aware of the audience, too concerned with maintaining her professional image even while her personal life was falling apart in real time. Instead, she did something worse. She laughed. Not a real laugh. A laugh with quotation marks around it. The kind of laugh that villains do in movies right before they reveal their evil plan. Of course, she said, that fake smile somehow getting even faker. After the song, I'll just wait. She said, wait, like it was a 4-letter word, which technically it is, but you know what I mean. She didn't walk away, though. That would have been too easy, too normal. No, she stood right there, about 5 feet away, watching us like a hawk watching mice, her arms crossed over her chest in a pose that was probably supposed to look casual, but really just looked threatening. Every few seconds, her foot would tap against the floor, tap, 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 keeping time with the music, but also clearly keeping time until she could unleash whatever verbal destruction she'd been preparing. Sophie leaned in close, her voice low enough that only I could hear. You know, you could feel the jealousy burn through her Dior perfume, right? Like, that's not a metaphor. I can literally smell the rage from here. It's got notes of betrayal, with a hint of how dare you. She was trying to make me laugh, and God help me, it was working. A smile tugged at the corners of my mouth despite everything. For once, I whispered back, she's not in control, and she absolutely hates it. It was true. In all our years together, Clara had always been the one steering the ship, making the decisions, controlling the narrative. She decided where we lived, where we went on vacation, which friends we kept in touch with, how we spent our weekends. I'd gone along with it because it was easier than arguing, because I loved her, because marriage is about compromise and I figured letting her take the lead was my compromise. But watching her stand there, powerless to do anything except wait while I danced with another woman, that was new territory. That was her on the outside looking in, and judging by her expression, the view wasn't great. The song finally ended. Thank God, because I'm not sure how much longer I could have maintained that level of casual indifference while my wife plotted my demise in the background. The jazz band transitioned into some upbeat number that signaled it was time for people to either leave the dance floor or commit to actually dancing, and Sophie and I stepped apart with the kind of perfect timing that probably made it look rehearsed. Thank you for the dance, Sophie said, loud enough for Clara to hear. You're much better company than half the people here. And you didn't step on my feet, so that's a bonus. She gave me a knowing smile, then turned to Clara. He's all yours. Try not to kill him in front of witnesses. Bad for your career. And with that absolutely iconic exit line, she walked away toward the bar, leaving me standing there. With my wife, who looked like she was seriously considering whether prison time would be worth whatever she was about to do to me. Clara grabbed my arm. Not gently, not affectionately, but with the grip of someone who was preventing a suspect from fleeing the scene. We need to talk, she hissed, already pulling me toward a quieter corner of the rooftop, away from the music and the crowd and the dozens of eyes that were still tracking our every move. Sure, I said, letting myself be dragged along like a prisoner being escorted to the gallows. Let's talk. I've got nothing but time. Well, except for that poker night I'm supposedly at. But that's fictional, so I guess the schedule's pretty open. The sarcasm just rolled off my tongue naturally at this point, a defense mechanism that had served me well over the years. She didn't respond, just kept walking, her heels clicking angrily against the rooftop floor, until we reached a section near the railing where the lighting was dimmer and the music was muted enough that we could hear ourselves think. She released my arm, turned to face me, and took a deep breath that I recognized as her preparing to deliver a speech breath. And that's when I realized something important. For the first time since I'd discovered that email, since I'd decided to crash this party, since I'd watched her dance with Richard like I didn't exist, for the first time, I had the upper hand. She was the one who was flustered, defensive, caught off guard. She was the one scrambling to regain control of a situation that had slipped through her fingers, and I was going to enjoy every second of it. Clara opened her mouth to start what I'm sure would have been an Oscar-worthy performance of righteous indignation, but I held up my hand like a traffic cop stopping a speeding car. "Before you say anything," I said, my voice calm in a way that I knew would irritate her more than yelling ever could. "Let's just acknowledge the absolute audacity of you being upset right now. Like, the sheer nerve of it. I need a moment to appreciate the irony here, because it's truly chef's kiss level hypocrisy." I actually did the chef's kiss gesture, fingers bunched together touching my lips before spreading them open, and I could see her jaw clench so hard I worried about her dental work. "Mark, you embarrassed me," she started, but I cut her off again because honestly, I'd spent 7 years letting her finish her sentences, and look where that had gotten me. "I embarrassed you." I let out a laugh that sounded more unhinged than I'd intended. "Clara, sweetheart, honey, light of my increasingly dark life. I danced with a colleague of yours. One dance. Appropriate distance maintained. Hands in PG-rated locations only. Zero grinding or inappropriate behavior of any kind. You, on the other hand, spent the better part of an hour flirting with your boss before slow dancing with him like you were auditioning for The Notebook 2, Corporate Edition. So please, explain to me using small words how I'm the one who embarrassed you." Her mouth opened and closed a few times, like a fish that had suddenly realized it was out of water and wasn't sure how it had gotten there. That was different," she finally managed, her voice losing some of its earlier conviction. "Richard is my boss. It's called networking. It's professional." "Oh, is that what we're calling it?" I leaned against the railing, crossing my arms. "Professional networking. Got it. So when I network with Sophie, who, by the way, was actually trying to save me from becoming a viral meme, that's inappropriate. But when you network with your hand on Richard's chest while he holds you close enough to share oxygen, that's just business as usual. Do I have that right? Just want to make sure I understand the rules of this game we're apparently playing." Clara's face was doing that thing where it cycled through emotions faster than a slot machine. Anger, frustration, guilt, defensiveness, all spinning around trying to land on something that would work in her favor. "You don't understand," she said, her voice dropping to that tone she used when she was trying to sound reasonable while saying completely unreasonable things. "There's politics involved. Dynamics you don't see. I have to maintain certain relationships to advance my career." "Relationships," I repeated, letting the word hang in the air between us like smoke. "That's an interesting word choice. Very corporate. Very sterile. Almost like you're trying to sanitize something that doesn't feel particularly clean." I watched her face carefully, looking for cracks in the facade, and I saw them. Tiny fissures around her eyes, a slight tremor in her lower lip that she quickly bit down on to stop. Before she could respond, I heard footsteps approaching from behind me. I turned to find Sophie walking toward us with 2 drinks in her hands, looking completely unbothered by the fact that she was interrupting what was clearly a domestic situation. "Figured you might need this," she said, handing me what appeared to be whiskey on the rocks. "And before you accuse me of stirring the pot, Clara, I'm just being a good Samaritan. Your husband looks like he's about to either pass out or commit a felony, and I'm trying to prevent both." Clara's eyes narrowed at Sophie with the kind of venom usually reserved for people who cut in line at Starbucks during morning rush. "This is a private conversation," she said, her voice icy enough to freeze the ocean. "Is it though?" Sophie took a sip of her own drink, completely unbothered. "Because from where I'm standing, you're having this conversation at a company event, on a rooftop, in front of about 80 witnesses who are absolutely going to be talking about this on Monday morning. So maybe private isn't the right word. Public spectacle feels more accurate." She turned to me, her expression softening slightly. "Can I borrow you for just 1 second? I promised to return him mostly intact." Clara looked like she wanted to argue, but Sophie was already gently steering me a few feet away, back toward the railing but out of Clara's immediate earshot. When we were far enough away that Clara couldn't hear us without obviously eavesdropping, Sophie's entire demeanor changed. The playful sarcasm dropped, replaced by something more serious, more concerned. "Look," she said quietly, "I need to tell you something, and you're not going to like it, but you deserve to know." My stomach dropped. There's a specific feeling you get when someone says those words, like your internal organs are all trying to migrate south for the winter simultaneously. "Okay," I said slowly, gripping my whiskey glass a little tighter. "Hit me with it." At this point, what's one more revelation? Sophie glanced back at Clara, who was standing exactly where we'd left her, arms crossed, foot tapping impatiently, looking like a principal waiting for a student to return from being scolded in the hallway. "They've been gossiping about her and Richard for months," Sophie said, her voice low and urgent. "And I mean everyone. Marketing, finance, HR, though HR is probably being paid to look the other way, if we're being honest. People talk. They've noticed the closed-door meetings that run long. The business trips where they somehow always end up at the same hotel. The way he promotes her over people who've been here longer and frankly deserve it more." I took a long drink of whiskey, feeling it burn down my throat in a way that was almost comforting. Oh, it was all I could manage. One syllable, 2 letters, a universe of hurt compressed into a single sound. Sophie nodded, and I could see genuine sympathy in her eyes, which somehow made it worse. Pity from a stranger is one thing. Pity from someone who clearly knew more about my wife's professional life than I did was something else entirely. "I'm not saying this to hurt you," she continued. "I'm saying it because you showed up here tonight clearly not knowing what you were walking into, and that's not fair. You deserve to know what everyone else apparently already does." "Define everyone," I said, because apparently I was a masochist who needed to know exactly how publicly humiliated I'd been. "Late meetings," Sophie said, ticking off points on her fingers like she was presenting at a board meeting. "Every Tuesday and Thursday, his office, doors closed, sometimes until 8 or 9 at night. Closed doors aren't unusual for executives, sure, but the pattern is. The consistency. And then there are the trips. Last month, they both went to the Chicago conference. Different flights, different hotels according to the expense reports, but 3 people from accounting saw them having dinner together at a restaurant that definitely wasn't on the conference itinerary. Intimate little corner table, wine, the works. I felt something inside me start to crack, like ice on a frozen lake when the temperature rises just enough. "Free promotions," I said, remembering Sophie had mentioned that earlier. "She got promoted twice in 18 months, Sophie confirmed. Meanwhile, James in sales, who's been with the company for 6 years, consistently exceeds his targets, has a literal wall of awards, gets passed over both times. You know what his review said? Needs to work on relationship building with senior leadership. Which is corporate speak for, you're not sleeping with your boss, so tough luck." I laughed, but it came out wrong, bitter and hollow. Guess I missed the staff memo titled, "How to Sleep Your Way Up, a Guide for the Ambitious Professional." The sarcasm was my shield, the only thing standing between me and complete emotional collapse in the middle of a corporate party. Sophie didn't laugh. She just looked at me with those sharp green eyes that had probably seen too much office politics and not enough justice. "I'm sorry," she said simply. "That was a dark joke, but I get it. Humor is how some of us cope with betrayal. I did the same thing when I found out my ex was cheating. Made jokes for weeks before I finally let myself cry about it. Comes with the territory," I said, trying to sound casual and probably failing spectacularly. Dark humor. Sarcasm. The ability to laugh while your life falls apart. It's either that or start screaming, and screaming seems like it would really harsh the vibe of this lovely event. Sophie smiled sadly. "For what it's worth, you're handling this better than most people would. I've seen grown men cry in the bathroom at office parties for less." She paused, seeming to debate whether to say more. "Look, I don't know your wife well. Different departments, different circles. But I know Richard, and I know his reputation. This isn't his first rodeo. There was a woman in marketing 2 years ago, similar situation, close working relationship, late nights, sudden promotion. Then suddenly she transferred to the San Diego office. People assumed she either got pushed out or realized she was the side character in someone else's story. So what you're saying is, I'm married to a cliché," I said, draining the rest of my whiskey. My wife is literally living out the plot of every trashy office romance that's ever been written, except without the happy ending and with significantly more devastating consequences for my mental health. I'm saying your wife made choices, Sophie corrected gently. Richard's a predator in a nice suit, sure, but Clara's an adult who knew exactly what she was doing. You don't accidentally end up in these situations. You make a series of decisions that lead you there. I nodded, processing this information while also trying not to process it, because processing it meant accepting it, and accepting it meant acknowledging that my marriage had been circling the drain for months while I'd been completely oblivious. Thanks for telling me, I finally said. Seriously, you didn't have to. You could have just rescued me with that dance and called it a day. But you went the extra mile, and I appreciate it. Even if right now I feel like I've been hit by a truck and then backed over a few times for good measure. You're welcome, Sophie said. She glanced back at Clara again, who was now checking her phone with the kind of aggressive thumb typing that suggested she was either venting to a friend or Googling how to make your husband disappear without leaving evidence. What are you going to do? Honestly, I looked out at the city lights, at all those buildings full of people living their lives, probably dealing with their own betrayals and disappointments and moments of crushing realization. I have no idea, but I'm definitely not confronting her here. She'd just gaslight me into thinking I'm crazy, that I'm seeing things that aren't there, that everyone's just gossiping because they're jealous. That's her specialty, making me doubt my own perception of reality. Sophie nodded like she understood. Smart. Get your evidence first. Make it impossible for her to deny. Then decide what you want to do with your life. She squeezed my arm in a gesture that was friendly but not flirty, supportive without being inappropriate. I'm going to head out. I've caused enough drama for one night, and honestly, these heels are killing me. But if you need anything, and I mean anything, even if it's just someone to vent to who understands corporate politics and moral bankruptcy, you have my number. Clara's assistant directory list goes to everyone. You're leaving? I felt a weird pang of panic at the thought of losing my only ally in this nightmare. You'll be fine, she assured me. You're stronger than you think. And Clara? She's running scared right now. You saw her face when we were dancing. That wasn't just jealousy, that was fear. Fear that she's losing control of the narrative. That's good for you. Keep her off balance. With that, Sophie walked away, disappearing into the crowd with her empty glass and leaving me standing there with my now empty whiskey and my newly shattered illusions. I turned back to where Clara was waiting, and our eyes met across the rooftop. She started walking toward me, her expression set in that determined way that meant she was about to try to spin this whole evening into something that was somehow my fault. But for once, I had information she didn't know I had. For once, I wasn't walking into the conversation blind. And that, I thought as she approached, was going to make all the difference. 2 days after the gala from hell, I found myself sitting in a coffee shop that smelled like burnt espresso and broken dreams, waiting for a man named Vince who came highly recommended by my college roommate's cousin's divorce attorney. Yeah, I know how that sounds, like I was hiring someone from a guy who knew a guy who once saw a Yelp review. But desperate times call for desperate measures, and I was currently so desperate I could have starred in my own daytime talk show episode titled, My Wife Might Be Cheating, the musical. Vince showed up exactly on time, which I appreciated because punctuality feels like a lost art in the age of sorry. Traffic was crazy texts sent from people who are clearly still in their pajamas. He looked exactly like you'd expect a private investigator to look. Late 40s, weathered face that had seen some things, wearing a jacket that had probably been in style sometime during the Clinton administration. He had the build of a retired bouncer and the eyes of someone who'd spent too many hours sitting in cars watching people do things they shouldn't be doing. Basically, he looked like if the word credibility became a person and decided to grow a mustache. Mark? He asked, extending a hand that felt like shaking hands with a catcher's mitt. His grip was firm but not aggressive, professional but not intimidating. I liked him immediately, which was good because I was about to tell this stranger all the humiliating details of my crumbling marriage. That's me, I said, gesturing to the chair across from me. Thanks for meeting me. Can I get you something? Coffee. A detailed explanation of how my life became a country song. He cracked a smile at that, which suggested he had a sense of humor. Always a good sign in someone you're about to pay to follow your wife around. Coffee's fine. Black. No sugar. Of course he drank it black. Men like Vince probably thought cream and sugar were for people who couldn't handle reality. He settled into the chair with the ease of someone who'd had this conversation 1,000 times before, pulling out a small notebook that looked like it had survived at least 2 decades of field work. I ordered him a coffee from the barista, who clearly wasn't being paid enough to care about the domestic drama unfolding in the corner booth, and then I launched into the whole sordid story. The email at 2 in the morning. The gala she didn't want me attending. The dance with Richard that looked less like networking and more like foreplay with a jazz soundtrack. Sophie's revelations about the office gossip and the pattern of behavior that everyone except me seemed to have noticed. I told him everything, watching his face for any reaction, any sign that he thought I was crazy or paranoid or just another jealous husband seeing shadows where there was only light. But Vince just listened, his pen moving across the notebook in quick, efficient strokes, nodding occasionally in a way that suggested he'd heard variations of this story more times than he could count. When I finally finished, he looked up from his notes and asked the question I'd been dreading. "What do you want from this?" he said simply. "You want photos? Hard evidence for divorce proceedings? Or do you want closure, confirmation one way or another, so you can stop wondering and start dealing with whatever the truth is?" I sat back, cradling my now-cold coffee like it was a security blanket. Is both an option? Or does that come with an upcharge? I was going for humor again, my default setting when faced with uncomfortable emotions, but my voice cracked slightly on the last word. "Both is always an option," Vince said, and there was something reassuring about the way he said it, like this wasn't my first rodeo, or rather, his first rodeo, since this was definitely my first time hiring someone to investigate my spouse. "But I gotta be straight with you, Mark. Sometimes people hire me hoping I'll find nothing. They want me to prove their suspicions wrong, to give them permission to feel crazy instead of betrayed. Other times, they already know the truth and they just need evidence to back up what their gut's been screaming at them for months. Which one are you?" I thought about that question for a long moment, watching the steam rise from Vince's coffee cup in lazy spirals. Honestly, I don't know anymore. A week ago, I would have bet my life that Clara loved me, that we were solid, that whatever problems we had were normal marriage stuff, not this. But now, I shook my head. Now I feel like I've been living with a stranger who just happens to look like my wife. So I guess I want the truth, whatever that looks like. Even if the truth is that I'm the idiot who didn't see what everyone else apparently did. Vince nodded slowly, like I'd just passed some kind of test. Fair enough. Here's how this works. I'll follow her for 2 weeks, 3 if needed. Document her movements, who she meets, where she goes. If there's something going on, I'll find it. If there's nothing, you'll have peace of mind and you can work on your marriage without this hanging over your head. Either way, you'll. No. He slid a contract across the table, along with a fee schedule that made me wince slightly, but not enough to back out. I require half up front, half when I deliver the report. And Mark, whatever I find, I report it straight. No sugarcoating, no editorializing. Just facts. You good with that? Yeah, I said, pulling out my credit card before I could talk myself out of this. Let's do it. Let's find out if I'm married to a faithful wife who just has unfortunate professional relationships, or if I'm the punchline to a joke everyone's been laughing at for months. I signed the contract with a flourish that felt more dramatic than necessary. But hey, if you're going to officially hire someone to investigate your spouse, might as well commit to the theater of it all. Vince took the contract, glanced over my signature, and nodded. I'll start tomorrow. In the meantime, act normal. Don't confront her, don't change your routine, don't do anything that would tip her off that something's different. Can you do that? It was phrased as a question, but his tone made it clear it wasn't really optional. I'm an IT project manager, I said dryly. I've spent the last decade pretending to care about synergy and paradigm shifts and whatever other corporate buzzwords get thrown around in meetings. Trust me, I can fake normal. Over the next 2 weeks, I became an Oscar-worthy actor in the production of My Life is Fine. Everything's great, definitely not falling apart. I went to work, came home, made dinner, asked Clara about her day, laughed at the appropriate moments, nodded sympathetically when she complained about office politics, which, in retrospect, was pretty rich considering she was apparently the office politics. I kissed her goodbye in the mornings and hello in the evenings. I even initiated sex once, which felt weird and performative and made me feel like I was betraying myself. But Vince had said, act normal, and sex was part of our normal. So I went through the motions while my brain screamed the entire time. Clara didn't seem to notice anything was different. Or if she did, she didn't comment on it. She was back to her usual routine. Wake up, go to work, come home, talk about her day in exhaustive detail, while I pretended to listen and definitely wasn't wondering if any of it was true. She mentioned Richard occasionally, always in the context of work stuff, always casual and professional. Richard wants me to lead the new client presentation. Richard thinks I should attend the conference in Austin next month. Richard said the board was impressed with my quarterly report. Richard. His name peppered through our conversations like seasoning on a dish that was already spoiled. I smiled and nodded and said things like, that's great, honey, and you deserve it, while internally cataloging every mention, every inflection in her voice when she said his name. Was there something there? A slight change in tone? A hint of something more? Or was I just paranoid, seeing patterns where there were none, like those people who think they see Jesus in their toast? Vince called me every few days with updates, his voice always calm and professional, delivering information the way a meteorologist delivers weather forecasts. Factual, detached, no emotional investment in whether it's sunny or storming. Monday, she went to the office, stayed until 6:30, stopped at Trader Joe's on the way home. Tuesday, office until 7, straight home. Wednesday, office, lunch meeting at that Italian place downtown. Alone, by the way, not with Richard. Thursday, office, gym for an hour, home by 8. It was the most boring surveillance report I could have imagined. No smoking guns, no clandestine meetings, no hours-long rendezvous at suspicious hotels. Just my wife living her normal life, being a normal person, doing normal things. Part of me felt relieved. See, I told myself, you're paranoid. You're seeing problems where there aren't any. Sophie was wrong. The office gossips were wrong. And you're going to owe your wife a massive apology and probably some very expensive jewelry. But another part of me, the part that had seen her dance with Richard, the part that remembered her face when she said I couldn't come to the gala, the part that had listened to Sophie detail months of suspicious behavior, that part wasn't convinced. That part whispered that maybe Clara was just good at hiding it. Maybe she knew to be careful. Maybe she'd gotten a sixth sense that something was different, even if she couldn't quite put her finger on what. When Vince finally called me after 2 full weeks, I was sitting in my car in the parking lot of a grocery store, putting off going inside because grocery shopping on a Sunday afternoon is basically Dante's 10th circle of hell that didn't make it into the final draft. I've got my report, he said without preamble. You want to meet, or you want me to email it? That bad? I asked, my stomach dropping like an elevator with cut cables. That boring, he corrected. Mark, I've been doing this for 20 years. I've caught people doing everything from embezzling to murder. Your wife? She's either the most faithful woman in Los Angeles, or she's hiding it better than a CIA operative. Office, gym, grocery store, home. That's it. That's her life. No suspicious meetings, no unexplained absences, no hotel visits, no nothing. I should have felt relieved. I should have felt vindicated. Instead, I just felt confused. So she's clean? Either she's clean, or she's smart enough to know someone might be watching, Vince said carefully. Has she seemed paranoid lately? Checking over her shoulder? Being extra careful with her phone? I thought about it. No? I mean, she's always been protective of her phone, but that's not new. She says it's because of work emails and client confidentiality. Even as I said it, I realized how hollow it sounded, like an excuse that's technically plausible but still feels wrong. Could be legitimate, Vince acknowledged. Could be something else. Here's the thing, Mark. The absence of evidence isn't evidence of absence. I didn't find anything, but that doesn't mean there's nothing to find. It just means if there is something, it's not happening during work hours or in public places where someone could see and report it. So basically, I just spent $2,000 to learn that my wife grocery shops and goes to the gym, I said flatly. You spent $2,000 to rule out the obvious scenarios, Vince corrected. Now you've got a choice. You can either accept that maybe you were wrong, maybe the office gossip was just gossip, and work on rebuilding trust in your marriage. Or you can keep digging, because your gut's still telling you something's off. But I gotta warn you, that second option? It's a rabbit hole. Once you start, it's hard to stop, even if you find nothing. I thanked Vince, paid him the remainder of his fee via Venmo, because even private investigators have adapted to the digital age and sat in that parking lot for another 20 minutes, watching people come and go with their shopping carts full of the mundane necessities of life. When I finally went home, Clara was in the kitchen making pancakes for dinner, which she did sometimes when she was feeling particularly domestic or guilty about something. She smiled at me like she'd just aced a test she hadn't studied for. Hey, perfect timing. I'm making your favorite, blueberry pancakes with real maple syrup, none of that fake corn syrup garbage. She was wearing my old college t-shirt and yoga pants, her hair in a messy bun, looking exactly like the woman I'd fallen in love with all those years ago. I smiled back, kissed her cheek, and told her it smelled amazing. And I thought, yeah, sweetheart, smile while you can. Because this might be intermission, but the season finale's still coming. One way or another, the truth would come out. It always does. A week after Vince's disappointingly boring report, I was in the middle of a mind-numbing conference call about cloud migration strategies, which is exactly as exciting as it sounds, meaning not at all, when my phone buzzed with a text from Sophie. Just 2 words, check the news. No context, no explanation, just those 3 words that immediately made my heart rate spike, like I'd just mainlined espresso directly into my veins. I muted myself on the call, not that anyone would have noticed since I'd contributed exactly 0 insights in the 45 minutes we'd been discussing bandwidth optimization, and pulled up my phone's browser. The headline hit me like a freight train doing 90 in a school zone. Executive misconduct at Stratosphere Group exposed by insider. It was everywhere. CNN, The Wall Street Journal, even the local news sites had picked it up. And there, in the 3rd paragraph, was the kicker. The insider who'd blown the whistle on the whole toxic operation was none other than Sophie Martinez, senior analyst in the finance department. I actually laughed out loud, which earned me a confused look from my coworker Jim, who was sitting 6 feet away pretending to pay attention to the same call. Sophie had done it. She'd actually done it. She'd taken everything she knew, all the office gossip, all the suspicious patterns, all the closed-door meetings and inappropriate relationships and promotions that made no sense, and she'd packaged it up into a formal complaint that apparently the board of directors couldn't ignore. The article was diplomatic in its language, dancing around specific names the way journalists do when their lawyers are breathing down their necks. But if you knew the players, you didn't need a decoder ring. Sources indicate improper relationships between senior staff and subordinates, creating a culture of favoritism and undermining merit-based advancement. Multiple employees reported feeling pressured to remain silent about inappropriate workplace dynamics. An investigation has been launched into several executives, including members of the C-suite. I texted Sophie back immediately. You absolute legend. Are you okay? Because let's be real, whistleblowers don't exactly get the hero treatment in corporate America. They get labeled as troublemakers, blacklisted, and generally treated like they committed treason against the holy church of quarterly profits. Her response came back within seconds, fired within the hour. Worth it. Also, you might want to prepare yourself. This is going to get messy. She wasn't kidding. By the time my conference call mercifully ended, without anyone noticing I'd been mentally checked out since minute 2, my phone was blowing up with notifications. News sites were updating their articles with more details. Twitter was having a field day with hashtags like #StratosphereScandal and #corporate trending in the Los Angeles area. Someone had already created a parody account for Richard that was posting fake confessions, which was simultaneously hilarious and probably legally questionable. But the real fireworks started around 6 p.m. when Clara came home. And came home is putting it mildly. She exploded through the door like a Category 5 hurricane with a personal vendetta against our welcome mat. Her hair was disheveled. Her makeup was smudged like she'd been crying or rubbing her eyes in frustration, and she was absolutely drenched from the rain that had started falling about an hour earlier. She looked like a movie poster for Corporate Nightmare, The Reckoning. You did this, she screamed before she'd even fully closed the door. No hello. No, how was your day? Just straight to the accusation. She threw her bag on the floor, her very expensive designer bag that she usually treated like it was made of spun gold and unicorn tears, and pointed at me like I was a defendant in a courtroom drama. You and that witch Sophie. You exposed me. You destroyed my career. I was sitting on the couch with a beer and a bowl of pretzels, watching this unfold with the detached fascination of someone watching a nature documentary about predators who just realized they were actually prey. "Oh, you mean Sophie?" I said calmly, taking a sip of my beer like we were having a casual conversation about the weather. "The witch with Wi-Fi and receipts? That's Sophie." Clara's face went through several shades of red that probably don't exist in nature. "This isn't funny, Mark. Do you have any idea what you've done? The board is launching an investigation. HR is interviewing everyone. My reputation is destroyed." She was pacing now, tracking water all over our hardwood floors that I'd spent a weekend refinishing last summer. "Your reputation," I repeated slowly, setting down my beer because this conversation clearly required my full attention. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly. Your reputation, built on closed-door meetings with your married boss, suspicious promotions, and behavior so inappropriate that everyone in your company was apparently gossiping about it. That reputation is destroyed. And somehow, this is my fault. Do I have that right? Just want to make sure I'm following the logic here." "I didn't do anything wrong," she shouted, but her voice cracked on the word wrong, betraying the lie before it even fully left her mouth. "It was just networking. Just politics. You don't understand how it works in the corporate world." I stood up, and I must have had a look on my face because Clara actually took a step back. I wasn't angry, not in the explosive, yelling way she was. I was something else, something colder, something that had been building for weeks while I smiled and pretended everything was fine. "You're right," I said quietly. "I don't understand how it works. Please explain to me how networking involves slow dancing with your boss while your husband watches from across the room. Explain to me how politics means getting promoted twice in 18 months while more qualified people get passed over. Explain to me how just business translates to months of office gossip about you and Richard that apparently everyone knew about except the one person who should have known, your husband." She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. She looked like a computer trying to process a command that didn't compute, stuck in an endless loop of trying to find an explanation that would make this okay. "You don't understand," she finally said, her voice smaller now, defensive. "There's pressure, expectations. I had to maintain certain relationships to advance. You don't know what it's like for women in leadership. We have to play the game differently." "Playing the game differently," I said, and I could feel something breaking inside me, something that had been holding on by a thread for weeks. "Is that what we're calling it? Because from where I'm standing, it looks less like playing the game and more like cheating at it. And the worst part? The absolute worst part." I moved closer to her, and I saw fear flicker across her face. Not fear that I'd hurt her. I'd never raised a hand to anyone in my life, but fear that I was done. Fear that the man who'd spent 7 years accommodating her, supporting her, believing her, was finally calling her bluff. "The worst part," I continued, my voice steady and cold, "is that you had me convinced I was crazy. When I asked about the gala, you made me feel like I was being paranoid for wanting to come. When I saw you dancing with Richard, you made it seem like I was overreacting. When Sophie told me about the office gossip, I actually defended you. I told myself there must be an explanation, that you'd never lie to me, that our marriage meant something. I laughed, but it came out bitter. Turns out the only person being played was me, and I was so busy trusting you that I didn't even realize I was holding the losing hand." Clara's eyes filled with tears, and she reached for me, but I stepped back. "Mark, please. It's not what you think. It's complicated. If you'd just let me explain." "Explain what?" I cut her off. "Explain how you prioritized your career over our marriage. Explain how you made choices that everyone except me could see were destroying us. Explain how you came home every night and acted like everything was fine while I was the punchline to jokes in your office break room." I shook my head. "Save it, Clara. I don't want explanations. I don't want excuses. I don't want to hear about how hard it is to be a woman in corporate America, because plenty of women manage to advance their careers without whatever the hell you were doing with Richard." "I never slept with him," she blurted out. And there it was, the admission I'd been waiting for without realizing I was waiting for it. Not, "I never did anything inappropriate." Not, "You're misunderstanding the situation." Just, "I never slept with him," which implied that everything up to that line was apparently fair game. "Oh, well, that's great then," I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "You never technically crossed the final line, so I guess everything else is totally fine. The emotional affair, the inappropriate relationship, the lying, the secret meetings, the fact that our marriage became secondary to your ambition. All of that's cool as long as you kept your clothes on. Is that seriously the defense you're going with? She crumpled then, literally sank down onto the couch like a puppet with cut strings, sobbing into her hands. I didn't mean for it to happen, she said between sobs. It started as mentorship. He was helping me advance. And then it became more, and I didn't know how to stop it without ruining everything I'd worked for. I stood there watching her cry, and I felt nothing. That's the part that scared me the most. Not anger, not sadness, not even satisfaction that she was finally being honest. Just nothing. Like someone had reached into my chest and removed the part of me that used to care about her pain. So you chose your career? I said flatly. You made a choice. You decided that promotions and titles and Richard's approval were worth more than this marriage. That's what you're telling me. I didn't think you'd find out, she whispered, and Jesus Christ, even her honesty was insulting. Not, I knew it was wrong. Not, I regretted it every day. Just, I didn't think you'd find out. Like the problem wasn't the betrayal itself, but the fact that she'd gotten caught. Well, congratulations, I said, grabbing my jacket from the back of the chair. You're right about one thing. Your reputation is destroyed. Your career is probably done at Stratosphere. And your marriage. I headed toward the door, pausing with my hand on the handle. That's destroyed too. Not by Sophie. Not by me. By you. You did this to yourself. Where are you going? She asked, panic rising in her voice. Literally anywhere but here, I said. I'm going to a hotel. I'm going to call a lawyer. And I'm going to start figuring out what my life looks like without you in it. I opened the door, letting in the sound of rain and the smell of wet pavement. Oh, and Clara? When HR interviews you for their investigation, maybe lead with something other than I didn't think I'd get caught. Just a thought. I walked out into the rain, got in my car, and drove. I didn't know where I was going, just away. Away from her, away from that house, away from the life I'd thought I was building. My phone buzzed with texts and calls from Clara, but I ignored them all. Instead, I called Sophie. Hey, she answered on the first ring. You okay? I left, I said simply. She admitted it. Not all of it, but enough. And I left. There was a pause, and then Sophie said, Good for you. That takes guts. Where are you? Driving. No destination. Just driving. Well, when you figure out where you're going, let me know, she said. I'm buying the first round. We can toast to unemployment and divorce. Should be fun. I laughed, and it felt good. Real. Like maybe, despite everything falling apart, I was going to be okay. Yeah, I said. Yeah, that sounds perfect. And for the first time in weeks, I actually meant it. 3 days later, I was back at the house to pick up some clothes when Clara ambushed me. And I mean ambushed. She'd clearly been waiting, probably watching from the window like some kind of suburban sniper waiting for her target to appear. The door flew open before I even got my key out, and there she was, looking like she hadn't slept since I left. Her hair was unwashed, mascara streaked down her cheeks like were paint applied by someone having a nervous breakdown, and she was wearing the same pajamas I'd seen her in when I grabbed my toothbrush 2 days ago. We need to talk, she said, but it came out more like a plea than a demand. Gone was the angry, defensive woman from our last confrontation. This was full soap opera mode. Tears, trembling hands, the whole 9 yards. I sighed, because honestly, I just wanted to grab my stuff and leave, maybe stop for tacos on the way back to my depressingly small hotel room that smelled like old carpet and broken dreams. Clara, I don't think. Please, she cut me off, and the desperation in her voice was almost impressive. Just 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking. Against my better judgment, and really, my judgment had been pretty terrible lately, so why break the streak now? I followed her inside. She immediately I didn't mean to, she sobbed, wringing her hands like a Victorian heroine who'd just discovered her corset was too tight. It just happened. I was lonely. You were always working late. I felt scared and vulnerable, and Richard was there, and it was just one dance, and I held up my hand, stopping her mid-ramble. So did COVID, Clara, but it still ruined lives. The words came out sharper than I'd intended, but God, the audacity of this woman to blame me for her choices was almost impressive in its shamelessness. She tried every line in the book after that. She was under pressure at work. She didn't know what she was doing. It meant nothing. Richard manipulated her. The office culture was toxic. She was in therapy now, Apparently, she'd found a therapist in 3 days, which was faster than I'd ever gotten an appointment for a regular checkup. So good for her, I guess. But then she made the fatal mistake. "You did this," she said, her tears suddenly drying up as anger took over. "You and Sophie destroyed my career. I'm unhireable now. The investigation, the press coverage, you ruined everything I worked for." I looked at her, really looked at her, and something cold settled in my chest. "I didn't destroy your career, Clara," I said quietly, grabbing my duffel bag. "I didn't make you dance with your boss. I didn't make you take those promotions you didn't earn. I didn't make you lie to me for months. You did all that yourself." I headed for the door, done with this conversation, done with her excuses, done with all of it. "But I didn't sleep with him," she screamed after me, like this was still the winning argument she thought it was. "Yeah," I said, pausing at the door. "You just danced your way into unemployment. Congratulations. Hope it was worth it." I walked out, her sobs following me down the driveway, and I didn't look back. For once, she couldn't talk her way out of this. For once, she wasn't the boss of the conversation, the controller of the narrative, the one who got to decide how the story ended. And watching her realize that, watching her finally understand that her words had lost their power, was worth every sleepless night I'd spent wondering if I was crazy. 3 months later, Clara decided that getting fired for inappropriate workplace conduct wasn't humiliating enough. She needed an encore performance. So she sued Stratosphere Group for wrongful termination, because apparently, consequences for your actions are only for other people. The courtroom was exactly like you'd see on TV, except quieter and with worse lighting. Clara sat at the plaintiff's table looking like she'd dressed for a funeral. All black, minimal makeup, the "I'm a victim" aesthetic cranked up to 11. Her lawyer, some guy in a suit that cost more than my car, kept using words like discrimination and hostile work environment, with a straight face that deserved an Oscar. Then Sophie's testimony came in. Emails, calendar screenshots, business trips that lasted suspiciously long, hotel receipts that Richard's assistant had accidentally CC'd to the wrong distribution list. It was beautiful, really, a masterclass in documentation. When I was called to testify, the judge asked me what I knew. "I didn't catch her cheating," I said simply. "I caught her hiding." The judge nodded like he'd heard this story 100 times before, because he probably had. Case dismissed. Marriage dismissed. Dignity restored. Clara walked out of that courtroom with nothing. No settlement, no vindication, no job prospects. Just the knowledge that sometimes the universe actually does keep score. 3 days after the trial, I was finally settled into my new apartment, small, but mine. No tension hanging in the air, no walking on eggshells, no queen pretending she ruled my life. Just peace, quiet, and furniture from IKEA that I'd assembled without having a mental breakdown. Personal growth, right there. Then came a knock at the door. Sophie stood there with a suitcase and that mischievous smile I'd come to appreciate. "They kicked me out for telling the truth," she said, shrugging like getting fired for doing the right thing was just another Tuesday. "Figured you might have room for a fellow outcast?" I stepped aside, grinning. "You exposed a corrupt boss, and I divorced one. Seems like we both cleaned house." She laughed, genuine, warm, the kind of laugh that doesn't come with hidden agendas or corporate politics attached. "So what now?" she asked, dropping her suitcase by the door. I headed to the kitchen, grabbing 2 mugs. Coffee. No dancing. No drama. Just 2 people who survived the corporate hellscape and lived to tell the tale. We clinked mugs instead of champagne glasses, and somewhere between her stories about unemployment adventures and my plans for a fresh start, I realized something important. Sometimes revenge doesn't come with fire and fury. Sometimes it walks in with a suitcase, a smile, and the promise that life after betrayal can actually be pretty damn good.